progress. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, and greetings of virtue for us all. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the grand launching of I Can Ask Indonesian Chapter. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Fernanda Christian, and I will be your master of ceremony for this event today. I Can Ask Indonesia is a part of the International Society of Public Law, the largest society consisting of professionals and academics in the field of public law, including administrative law, constitutional law, international law, and other fields of law. The grand launching of the Indonesian chapter of I Can Ask today will take place over 2 days on the 19th and 20th of December and will certainly be a special and symbolic moment, marking the strong growth and interest in public law in Indonesia and the need to accommodate a space for dialogue and collaborations between academics and professionals in response to the rapid development of technology in society today. The creation of I Can Ask Indonesian chapter began back in 2023, marked with the initial informal communication and discussions between Dr. Rosa Ristawati, assisted by Mr. Bernard Nicholas Singarimbun, LLM, with the leaders of the Directorate of Chapter Development, I Can Ask, Professor Felicia Kopinigri and Dr. Johanna Frulich. Between 2023 till 2024, communications intensified through various academic forums, virtual meetings, and exchanges of ideas regarding the form of the organization, scope of activities, and possible contributions by the Indonesian chapter. In 2024, we entered the stage of strengthening our organizational foundations. Mr. Damian Agata Juvens, LLM, joined in the initiative and became actively involved in the formulation of academic direction, network development, as well as internal and external communications. Alongside other founding members, Mr. Damian Agata Juvens LLM progressed collectively and finalized the concept and structure of the organization, leading to his current position as the co-chair of I Can Ask Indonesian Chapter. In the beginning of 2025, formal communications were established with the I Can Ask Directorate of Chapter Development. The suggestion to form the I Can Ask Indonesian Chapter was formally suggested, along with the elucidation and elaboration on the background of creation, academic purpose, organizational structure, and commitment to the values of I Can Ask, such as inclusivity, diversity, and multidisciplinary dialogue. The communication and evaluation process between the founders in Indonesia and the I Can Ask Executive Board Committee was conducted, including clarifications, refinements to the proposal, and conformities with the I Can Ask organization. After the aforementioned processes, in July 2025, I Can Ask Executive Board Committee formally granted the approval for the formation of I Can Ask Indonesian Chapter. This approval is a mark of significant importance for the public law academic community in Indonesia, which opens the pathway to broader collaborations between the academics in Indonesia and the I Can Ask network internationally. Today's grand launching will begin with several greetings from those behind I Can Ask and I Can Ask Indonesia, followed by intriguing lectures from experts in public law to expand our knowledge further. Without further ado, we will invite the chair and co-chair of I Can Ask Indonesian Chapter, Dr. Rosa Ristawati, and Mr. Damian Agata Juvens LLM to give their greetings to this very special occasion. Dr. Rosa and Mr. Agata, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Fernanda, for greeting to us, and thank you for a nice presentation for our icons chapter Indonesia and introduction to our chapter Indonesia. So let me begin with sending a warm greeting to Professor Michaela Hillbronner. I hope that I pronounce your name correctly. Thank you very much for uh, attending this important agenda for our icons chapter Indonesia. I believe that in your place it's still dark because I'm right now in Stockholm, so it is also very dark here. So thank you very much for your time in this very early in the morning your time. uh, and I would like to introduce Professor Michaela Hilberner, is now the co-president for ICON's International Society on Public Law. So we will also expect Joanna, who is the director of the chapter development for ICONs, and other than that, we will also expecting our colleague as the speaker and the moderator in these 2 days agenda of grand launching of ICONS chapter Indonesia. So after that, I will allow me, Michaela, to speak in Bahasa because this is a chapter Indonesia. So I believe that most of the colleague are also Indonesia. So I want to give uh, sense of Indonesia. Okay. Uh, so Bapak Ibu, before that, I would like also to introduce Mr. Damian Agata, who is co-chairing this chapter Indonesia, and he will introduce himself. And also we have the executive secretary, Mr. Bernard Nicholas Singarimbun, who will also uh, introduce himself to all of us. So, Bapak Ibu sekalian, distinguished guests, distinguished participant in this agenda of grand launching Icons Chapter Indonesia, yang terhormat kolega, eh, yang saya hormati senior, para senior, eh, guru besar, dan kolega teman-teman akademia yang saya cintai dan saya hormati.
Yeah,
Eh,
alhamdulillah.
Selamat siang semuanya. Saya berterima kasih kepada Bapak Ibu yang sudah mengikuti dan akan mengikuti 2 hari agenda kita Icons Chapter Indonesia, yang sebetulnya fokus dari acara ini adalah ingin memberikan pengenalan ya, introduction, perkenalan bahwa chapter Indonesia right now has been exist starting from this years. Kita akan eksis dan uh, committed pada pelaksanaan kegiatan-kegiatan akademia yang ada di area public law, Bapak Ibu sekalian. Nah, untuk itu kami juga mengundang Bapak Ibu sekalian untuk bersama-sama eh, join bersama-sama kita join dan menjadi member di Icons Chapter Indonesia ini. Mungkin nanti Pak Damian Agata akan menguraikan beberapa hal yang terkait dengan deskripsi apa itu dan apa yang akan kita lakukan dalam Icons Chapter Indonesia ini. Mungkin itu short greeting untuk Bapak Ibu sekalian. Semoga Bapak Ibu sekalian dapat mengambil manfaat dari pelaksanaan 2 hari grand launching agenda Icons Chapter Indonesia ini. Terima kasih sekali telah bergabung dan kami berharap kita bisa bersama-sama mengembangkan Icons Chapter Indonesia, terutama kita bisa bersama-sama mengembangkan area public law dan memberi manfaat pada area akademia dan area praktisi juga. Terima kasih. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Back to Fernanda.
Thank you, Dr. Rosalistati, for the greetings. Perhaps the co-chair of the Indonesian chapter, Mr. Dewan Agata, can also proceed with your greetings.
Thank you, Fernanda. Distinguished guests, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, and welcome to everyone joining us online from different places and time zones. Allow me first to express my sincere appreciation to my co-chairs, Ibu Rosa, for her remarks just now. She is the soul and spirit of ICONS Chapter Indonesia. It is truly an honor for me to work alongside her in leading this chapter. The establishment of ICONS Indonesia is very much a collective effort built on the time, energy, and commitment of many people. And for that reason, its future success will also depend on our continued joint effort to keep this chapter active, relevant, and of course, impactful. Today's grand launching, albeit conducted online, marks an important milestone. It reflects not only how we adapt to new ways of connecting, but also how public law itself is shaped by evolving social, technological, and institutional realities. The establishment of ICANS Indonesia is meaningful not only for academics, students, and legal practitioners, but also for Indonesia more broadly. Public law today no longer belongs only to classrooms, courtrooms, or textbooks. It shapes how power is exercised, how policies are designed, and how the state responds to the everyday problems of society. One development we see clearly in Indonesia is how the government is becoming increasingly adaptive and sometimes very creative in using public authority to address matters that were once considered private. This trend is not necessarily negative. In some cases, it reflects genuine efforts to respond quickly to complex challenges. But it also raises important questions. Where should the boundary lie between public authority and private autonomy? How do we ensure that efficiency does not come at the expense of rights, accountability, and legal certainty? And how do we preserve democratic legitimacy when regulations and policies evolve faster than public debate? These questions underline why continuous critical and open discussion is essential. ICANS Indonesia is established precisely to keep these discussions alive, especially at a time when new regulations and policies emerge rapidly and demand careful scrutiny. Beyond that, ICANS Indonesia offers an inclusive platform. It brings together scholars, practitioners, students, and policymakers. Academic ideas can be tested in practice, while insights from practice can enrich and challenge academic thinking. This interaction is crucial in public law to remain both principled and responsive. There is also a broader dimension. A strong culture of public law debate contributes to better governance, improving policy quality, strengthening institutional accountability, and fostering public trust. In the long run, this benefits not only the legal community, but Indonesia's democratic resilience as a whole. Finally, ICANS Indonesia connects Indonesia more firmly to global public law conversations. Our experiences and challenges deserve to be discussed internationally, not as peripheral voices, but as active contributors. Even though we gather online today, the commitment we mark is very real. This grand launching is not an endpoint, but a beginning. ICANS Indonesia will only thrive through sustained collaboration, shared responsibility, and continued participation from all of us. Thank you for being part of this journey. I very much look forward building ICANS Chapter Indonesia together with you. Thank you, Fernanda.
Right, thank you very much for the very warm and thought-provoking greetings from our chair and co-chair, Dr. Risa Risawati and Mr. Damian Agata Yuvens, LLM. Next, we will invite the co-president of ICON-S, Professor Michaela Helbronner, to give her greetings. You may have the floor, Prof.
Well, thank you very much for having me here. And first of you all, a very warm welcome and a huge thank you to all of you for organizing this chapter in the first place. Having been involved myself a few years back with the creation of the German chapter, I know it takes a lot of work. So thank you all very much for putting in that work. You're very welcome in the society and we're very glad to have you. I should be saying that I'm saying this also, of course, in the name of my co-president, co-chair, Sergio Verdugo, and the ICON Secretariat. Sergio can't be here today. He's traveling back to Chile. But I'm speaking in the name of all of us in saying this. I thought I should be saying a few words about the ICON Society in general. ICON, as you know, stands for International Society of Public Law. And this is how we understand ourselves. We want to be a society where traditionally a lot of people do comparative law, but this is not restricted to comparative law, but we really want to have people speaking about public law from different perspectives, from different angles, and that includes, of course, international law and regional law as well. The ICON Society was founded in 2014 by Professor Joseph Weiler and Sabino Cassese and held its first conference in Florence in 2014. The next conferences were all sort of in North America or in Europe, conferences in New York, in Berlin, and Copenhagen. But then we sort of managed to get out a little bit out of the Western comfort zone, as it were, and went to Santiago de Chile for the first conference outside that. And then since have been also to Hong Kong, Wrocław in Poland, Wellington, Madrid, and this year, actually, still in my head, it's already last year. And we were in Brasilia, as you may know, and our next conference in summer, to which I want to invite all of you, is going to be in Dublin. One thing perhaps about the annual conferences, this is in many ways where most of the society come together. We are also aware that holding the conference in different places, it's often a challenge to travel far. So we are trying to pay some attention to things such as visas and whether they're possible to get. But of course, just traveling across continents places a burden on people, both environmentally, actually, but also financially or in terms of care, if you have people to take care of. I want to say that children are very welcome at the conference if that's an issue for you. My husband and I, who've both attended these conferences, have often taken our kids, and it has generally worked well. Sometimes we can offer childcare, but you're also should feel free to take them into the room and just come along. It usually works just fine. We are also trying, of course, to make it possible for people from different places to come and attend by changing our locations. And so next year, we will be, not next year, but in 2028, we will be back to Asia, to Taiwan. And then I hope to see many of you there. That would be lovely. The conferences are pretty big, as you may know. We have sometimes between 1,000 and 2,000 participants. That was our record in Madrid. But last year was 1,100 people from 58 countries. And I should also say that round about half of those people have been early career researchers. And this is something that does matter to us. We are aware that in many countries, actually, I think almost independently of where you are on the globe, it is often not an easy time if you're an early career researcher and you don't have a position yet. So we try and help to the degree that we can to enable people to come to these conferences, use them. We have some early careers events at the conference. And in that context, I should also mention that each year we are organizing an online writing school for people in particular who want to publish something in an international journal such as ICON, where we invite a few people from journals like that, editors who talk about, for example, what it is to write an abstract, how to do a literature survey and things like that. And we also have the Winter Summer School in Sydney, which our former co-president, Ross Dixon, is running together with people in the Secretariat, Amal Sethi, for example, and a couple of others, where early careers can apply and get the possibility to attend that without having to spend funds of their own, which is why it's quite competitive to come. But nevertheless, this is something you should absolutely consider if you're interested. Besides the annual conferences, the ICON Society has grown also quite a lot over the past few years. We now have quite a lot of chapters, nearly all over the globe, really. So we have chapters these days in Europe and North and South America. We have very strong presence in Latin America, actually. But we also have chapters in Africa, such as Nigeria and South Africa. And increasingly also in Asia, Singapore, South Korea, Taiwan, and you, of course. And Johanna, whom I'm seeing online here, may talk a little bit more about that later. I'm not sure. Hello. And the chapters are really an important part of the society. And that's something I want to highlight, of course, in this context, especially because it's not always feasible for everyone to travel to the annual conferences as much as we would like that. The chapter is what can hold people together within a local community, but also in a way that tries to connect, I think, with the global discourses that we have. And so that's an important part of the society, and this is where a lot of the people who are participating in events are actually in touch with the society. So you are very much at the forefront of what people will actually get in touch with. And this is an important reason why they're so interesting and important. I should also say that we have a couple of interest groups these days. That's another format in where we would invite you to participate. These interest groups do meet at the annual conferences, but they often have also meetings during the year, many of which are online, and the interest groups are on specific subject areas, but the idea is that they should be sort of open to people from different regions, working from different perspectives on similar topics. And so I'd really want to invite you to join these, not be shy, write to the people who are convening them and say, I'm interested in participating in this. What are the possibilities? Are you organizing something? And get in touch that way. We are also connected, of course, with the journal, the Icon Journal, and the blog iConnect, which we have just revived and restarted, as it were, which is also, I want to say, a good forum, especially also if you want to highlight, for example, interesting developments from your own jurisdiction, or make a broader point, something that isn't quite an academic article, but is nevertheless making a contribution to the global discourses that we have. I think it's a good opportunity also to be visible and sort of open yourselves up to those kinds of global conversations. So again, an invitation, if you have something you want to write, get in touch with the editors of the blog. And that just leaves me with one last point to say. I said a little bit before about how ICON is trying to unify, or is trying to, not unify is the wrong word, but is trying to speak to people who are coming from multiple subdisciplines within public law, international law, human rights, constitutional law, but also administrative law. And we have a lot of political scientists as well. It is very important to us to have those different perspectives, but also to be politically open, in the sense that we do want to have conservative voices. We want to have left liberal voices and very critical voices as well, including from a Marxist perspective and so on. We do have a commitment in terms of values to democratic constitutionalism of some sort, but democratic constitutionalism can obviously take a range of forms. But it is, of course, a time where this commitment to democratic constitutionalism is tested to some degree. And so I think that is the conversations we're having these days are a lot about democratic erosion. In an Asian context, we might also speak about democratic consolidation, of course. And there's a range of challenges also now geopolitically and so on. And those challenges really require global conversations, I think. This is maybe to some degree, this has always been true, and we're just having that sense now. But I think more than before in the discipline, we have realized that it is necessary to sit down together, to talk to each other, to listen to different perspectives, and sort of say goodbye a little bit to what was a longstanding Western arrogance and thinking that North Americans and Europeans will sort it out, and the rest is there to listen and learn, as it were. And that's not an attitude that we want to encourage. We want to have genuinely global conversation. Personally speaking, I believe, for example, I am married to a South African, so that's for me a jurisdiction to which I'm looking. But there's, I think, many things to be learned for a German from South Africa. And I imagine if we had more conversations, then I would be discovering other things to learn from other countries. And this is one reason, I think, why it's very important for us to have chapters like yours in the society as well, which bring in different perspectives, which enable us to see our own blind spots in a different light, to realize where might be sometimes we have taken things for granted. And so I explicitly want to invite those coming from critical perspectives also to make themselves heard in the society, and bring your perspectives in, challenge ideas that you find if you think they are worth challenging. And we will try and listen and learn, and hopefully we can make some progress together. I think, as I said, it's an important time to not just have those conversations among a very small group of people. And with that, I want to end. I don't want to keep you too long from your conference. I'm sorry that I can't attend more of the conference. It's my husband's birthday today, which is why I will be disappearing after this. But I hope you have a very fine first conference. And thank you so much again for putting together all the effort for this conference, for the foundation of the chapter. And I wish you all the best of luck. And hopefully I'll see some of you maybe in Dublin.
Happy birthday to your husband, Michaela. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Michaela Helbronner, for the very warm and inviting greetings for all of us here today. Up next, we'll invite the Director of ICONS Chapter Development, Ms. Johanna Frulich, PhD. Ms. Johanna, you may have the floor.
Thank you very much. I am very happy to be here. I thank you for inviting me, and of course I'm representing the whole chapter development directorate. Hi to Michaela, who is just leaving. So I'm very happy that I can have a few words in this ground lounge of your chapter. I've been there from the very beginning as Rosa, and then Bernard joined the team effort to initiate this chapter, which is really unique, as Michaela pointed out before me. At the society, we are really trying to make the society spread to places where it's harder to find the society in presenting people, and it's harder to reach out, not just with ideas, but that they reach out to us. Of course, it's a mutual influence that we try to support, and of course establish as time goes by. So one of the most important goals for us is to as just Michaela said, try to be more present outside the classical jurisprudence of comparative constitutional law and public law. And I think in this context, the Indonesian chapter is really important. So as I said, I was there from the beginning of the initiative of creating the Indonesian chapter, and we have had several rounds of reviews, as both Bernard and Rosa remembers, I'm sure. But we were all the time just trying to make sure that everything is the best for you, first of all, and for the society. So what the main idea that I would like to bring here is the importance of friendship, because I think from the moment we started to work together, first with Felicia and then with Vicente, how we looked at any chapter initiative, and yours as well, is like another group of friends that we would like to help. And friendship in the philosophical sense, that we want the best for you. And this is going to continue. This is going to continue when, for example, you will send us your yearly report about how things were going in your chapter. We will be there as friends in this sense for you if you have issues, for example, with appointing, if there is a situation in the governing bodies that is unforeseen, or there's something that you didn't expect to happen, but it happened and it makes something more difficult, or that you don't know how to or whom to choose, or don't know what kind of event to make, you don't know how to get the money for the event, etc. So there will be so many questions that would require for you to look at us as friends, and also not at us, but also the whole society. So in the past, we have done this chapter mentor program, and that was exactly it was meant to provide this sense of friendship as well among different chapters. So we chose a new chapter and an older chapter with a longer history in that sense, and the chapter with the longer history was the mentor of the younger chapter. So it was just like friends in a school. The senior one was helping the younger one. So we can absolutely we are absolutely thinking about doing it again, and in that sense, you can even choose which country you would like to turn to if you have difficulties, issues, questions, or doubts. Also, I think that the basic idea of good governance, something that we would like to maintain and help you providing, is friendship among the different members of the government. If you are looking at each other as friends, knowing that honestly everyone is looking for the best for the other one, and therefore for the whole chapter, nothing can go really wrong. So the best and most important thing is to kind of build up and preserve this view with which you can turn to each other, because now you are in a genuinely wonderful and difficult endeavor. So it will not be easy to build up this kind of community, a community that is new and genuine, and I think first of its kind in Indonesia, if I'm correct, and connect with your own people on a national level and on a local level, but also connect on the global level, as Michaela put it, made it evident in many different ways. So it is very hard, but it will be very beautiful. And the more you are able to preserve and build friendship among yourselves, the more chance you have to make it a truly beautiful and first of its kind endeavor. So that is what I'm wishing you. And I am sorry if you can hear some whining and crying in the background. I have 3 little children, so I could talk a lot about how one is a chapter development director and the mom of 3 little peanuts. I wish you really all the best of luck, and please truly consider me as a friend now and in the future too. And I wish you all the very best of luck. Ciao, dear Rosa and Bernard, and everyone who I will have the chance to meet in the future.
Thank you so much, Joanna, and see you in the next Icons conference. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for the kind greetings and well wishes from Miss Joanna. We sincerely thank your assistance in our establishment process. Up next, we will proceed with some additional comments or greetings with Mr. Damian Agatha Yuvensa M.
Well, not actually a greeting, Fernanda, but okay. I just want to say thank you very much to Professor Michaela and Joanna for your clear and insightful introduction to ICON as its purpose, its activities, and the values it stands for. Your explanation helps us see how ICON-S function not only as an academic society, but as a truly global community committed to open dialogue, inclusivity, and development of public law. On behalf of ICON-S Chapter Indonesia, we are grateful for your support and for welcoming us into the broader ICON-S network. We are very much look forward to contributing to and learning from this global conversation. Thank you once again and see you in Dublin.
Right, thank you very much for the short greetings from Mr. Dewanagata, for the Director of ICON Chapter Development, Ms. Joanna Fröhlich, PhD, and also the Co-President of ICON's Professor Michaela Heilbronner. We will now proceed to a brief break. And so in this duration, the participants may stay in the Zoom and turn off their cameras. And please wait for further information from the committee in the chat box. Thank you for joining today's grand launching event. Good afternoon, Professor Philip Dunn. We would like to welcome you to our grand launching event. All right, since we can now continue, we'll now have the first lecture session. That'll be with Professor Philip Dunn, which will be guided by our moderator, Mr. Bernard Nicholas Singaribun LLM, who is currently serving as the Executive Secretary of ICON-S Indonesian Chapter. I will now invite Mr. Nicholas Singaribun LLM to lead the first lecture session.
Good morning and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, all the respective audiences. It's been our pleasure on behalf of the ICON-S Indonesia, of course, Dr. Rosari Sawati and Mr. Damian Agatayu and LLM are the co-chairs of the ICON-S Indonesia, and it's been also an honor for me to greet all of the audiences here as a chapter secretary for the organizations. So on this case, I would like to also to address my appreciation. Thank you to Professor Philip Dunn, who also give the time to greet and to be part of the ICON-S Indonesia as the speaker on the grand launching today and tomorrow. So before it, probably Ibu Rosa or Bapak Damian want to say hi to Professor Philip Dunn before I give the floor to Professor Philip.
Hi, Professor Philip. Thank you very much for joining us and thank you for sharing your thoughts in today's discussion. Thank you, Bernard.
All right. So without further ado, I would like to say hi to Professor Philip Dunn. Good morning, guten Morgen, Professor.
Good morning.
It's very nice to see you online again after a few months, and it's our pleasure for having you, especially with your interesting topic in about the Southern Turn the comparative constitutional law. So before I give the floor to you further, I would like to share a short biography of from Professor Philip. So Professor Philip Dunn is a professor of law at Humboldt University in Berlin, where Professor Philip also holds the chair in public and comparative law, and his research focuses on the role of law in the encounter of entanglement between South and the North part of the globe, and also in the international, comparative, and European law, and in legal theory and legal history. And Professor Philip Dunn is also the co-chair of the Icons Chapter Germany, and he is also the editor-in-chief of the Quarterly Journal of the World Comparative Law. So on this occasion, Professor Philip Dunn will present his topic about the Southern turn in comparative constitutional law, which is a very interesting topic because nowadays the global South countries showing that their constitutional history and the colonialism background also affects how the scholars see that this is a window opportunities and a future benefit for the academia to learn from its countries in the global south. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Professor Philip Dunn. So the stage is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bernhard, for this very kind introduction and for the invitation more generally. It's really a great pleasure to be here with you. What is for me the morning, but I guess for you already the early afternoon. And on this occasion of the launch of the Indonesian chapter of ICANS, as just mentioned, I'm currently and since a few years the co-speaker or co-president for the German chapter, and it's been really a pleasure to use ICON, the Society of International Constitutional Law, as a means to provide a platform for diverse types of scholars. So what we really have done is organizing regular meetings that draw in senior and more junior scholars who come more from a doctrinal background, but also from a more political or contextual science background. And so I can only congratulate you to this step to also launch ICON-S in Indonesia. And I wish you all the very best to sort of make this into a very vibrant and lively platform for lots of scholars to come in. So so very happy to be here and honored to be here. And I wish you all the very best for the next 2 days of this launch event. As just mentioned, so I'm a comparative scholar and very much interested in how this is a sort of a conversation which is not just in one region or one one area of law, but is really an international conversation. And this is what I want to speak about. I want to speak about a little bit sort of the state of the art or the moment that we see right now in comparative constitutional law, and about comparative constitutional law as an international conversation. And I mean by international conversation, a conversation that is going on between researchers and research on comparative constitutional languages. And so far, I have to say, it's mostly research that is conducted in the English language, and that is conducted among international scholars or constitutional scholars in international associations, just like ICON-S, and that is published in mostly English language journals, which are published mostly in global north countries, the UK or the US, thinking, for example, of the really flagship journal of ICON-S itself, ICON, but also of journals like Comparative Constitutional Law or Comparative Constitutional Studies and World Comparative Law. And what I want to argue a little bit and put to the table here, and then hopefully also discuss with you, is that this is an international conversation, but it's only very slowly becoming a truly global conversation. And by truly global, I would say and mean that it's so far really been a conversation that's been dominated by scholars from the global north, from Europe and the US. And the role of non-Western scholars is only slowly emerging. And I mean, this is, of course, also very much addressed to you in Indonesia or in Southeast Asia more generally, or Asia more generally, that I have the impression that there is a certain momentum, but I think it's interesting to think about this momentum to make this conversation not just international English language, but truly international, global. So I want to proceed in 3 steps. I want to not speak for too long because I hope we also will have a conversation, but I want to sort of proceed in 3 steps. The first will be a little bit an outline of the short history of comparative constitutional law, which I would sketch over the last sort of 3-4 decades, pretty much. So this is a little bit setting the background. And then the second step will be that I want to explain what I and colleagues have started to call a southern turn, which is mostly the idea that we have to make a few methodological or theoretical kind of decisions in order to make this conversation a global conversation. So I want to address a few more methodological and theoretical points. And then the last step, briefly, I want to turn this also into some thoughts about what might be perhaps Indonesian ideas or sort of ideas, constitutional ideas, which emerge from the Southeast Asian context that can contribute to the conversation. Okay, so let me start with my first step and think a little bit about sort of the background, the state of the art of comparative constitutional law, how we have come where we are right now at the end of the year 2025. So I think it's important to realize that for the longest time, comparative law was actually a domain of private lawyers. It was comparative private law that emerged as a first sort of academic discipline and comparative legal discipline round about the year 1900. So this is going back to the large conference 1900 in Paris. And we see that so around 120 years ago, 130 years ago, the first associations of comparative law, the first journals for comparative law, and the first more professionalized international discussion about comparative law emerged, but it was mainly in the private law domain. And also when we look then in the 20th century, it was private comparative law where major theoretical advances were made. The move from normalism to functionalism, from functionalism to contextualism. The main scholars, the big scholars, the big also textbooks, the big books or texts that were written were mostly actually in the context of private law. In fact, it was only until the 1990s, I would argue, 1990s or even 2000, that a separate, theoretically distinct and organizationally distinct sphere of comparative constitutional law emerges. And the reason for this lack, or the reason for the primary role of private law, was seen that constitutional law was often seen as too unique in a way, or too national, too particular to be compared, as constitutions to be seen as the expression of a very particular constitutional itinerary, political history of a society, and therefore hard to compare. It was also often remarked that constitutions ultimately are rather unstable in comparison, at least to the more, let's say, eternal constellation in private law. Thinking about contracts or torts, there is a very, very sort of long-lasting, almost sort of eternal kind of assumption about what are the interests and the ideas that flow in. So constitutional law was seen as too particular, too unstable to be addressed really in comparative law. There always existed a school of comparative politics. So Löwenstein and other scholars who we cite today as early writers, they were of course already comparing public or governmental systems. They were comparing public authority ways. But this was really, or federalism, for example, there's an old tradition of comparing federal systems and the like. But this was much more in the field of comparative politics, political science, not so much turning on law or even doctrine. And I would think that the emergence of comparative constitutional law as a separate, distinct professional field is just about 20, 30 years ago. And so this emergence in the 1990s or around 2000 took place, but it took place also under very particular circumstances. So if we think back for a moment into the global constellation of the 1990s, we of course remember that this is the time after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the end of the Cold War, and pretty much in the time that we nowadays like to call the unipolar moment, where especially the US Americans and their allies were able to shape the imagination about constitutional law. It was very much the idea that liberal democracy is the one game in town ultimately, that now after the end of communism and the turning of many countries away from authoritarianism, now basically the whole world would unite in this one way of organizing the political and constitutional structures. And it is also the time, as you know, that this model of liberal democracy was more or less aggressively or actively promoted around the time when you think of Iraq, Afghanistan, East Timor, and other areas where there was a lot of also international support and external support to make this model of constitutional law fly. It's also the time, last point perhaps, where the talk of an internationalization of constitutional law emerged, because the assumption arose that fundamental rights, democracy, the rule of law were just seen as, uncontested standards pretty much of constitutionalism. And therefore one could have a conversation across all continents about these doctrines. And this is also now where we see comparative constitutional scholarship emerging. At the time, perhaps one of the most obvious discussions was about the role of the judiciary, the role of supreme and constitutional courts. You might know the notion of juristocracy, I think coined by Rand Herschel, took the stage, Tom Ginsburg, and there were a lot of studies which really foregrounded the role also of constitutional courts and their organization, but also really going into rather doctrinal discussions about law. But what is remarkable, I think, about this moment is also that it's pretty much a northern kind of conversation, and it ignored much of the rest of the world. When you look at those early days, it was very much at least driven by scholars from the global north, whereas jurisdictions from Africa, Latin America, and Asia only seldom featured. And what also was interesting about this moment, that when they featured, so when there was an extension of comparative law into non-Western regimes, it was more seen as a more neutral kind of extension of the comparative pool, without much thinking about the particular histories and the particular experiences that were made in the global south. And I think what that also translates to is that it was done in pretty much by ignoring the questions of colonial legacies and the question to what extent the earlier encounters of North and South had actually shaped also constitutional or political thinking in around the world, and whether they continue or not. So I think this ignorance of colonial legacies and the ignorance of a deeper engagement with the histories and the experiences from the global south pretty much shaped that time. And now I'm coming to the end of this first part, because I think that changed around the mid 2010s. So about 10 years ago, I think the conversation began to shift, and it became clear to some scholars and a growing number of scholars that the integration and the integration of constitutional law and the constitutional experiences from the non-West had to engage also much more deeply with the contexts and the histories of colonialism in those countries, in order to just see the pattern, not as the one mono causal effect for things, but as an important context for understanding political and constitutional histories. So I'm coming to the second, my second step. So now I want to look a little more closely into what one can call this southern turn, and observation that around 10 years ago, 5 to 10 years ago, the conversation started to shift, and more southern jurisdictions started to become important players in the constitutional conversation. So I want to point perhaps as just one marker to the volume that the Colombian scholar Daniel Bonilla Maldonado published in 2015 called The Constitutionalism of the Global South. I think that's perhaps the first larger volume which even uses the notion of the Global South in its title. And the central observation of Daniel and his collaborators was that we might see an emergence of a sort of more global conversation, but the vocabulary, the concepts, the doctrines about which we talk and the way we understand them is still very much based on ultimately Western experiences, which are turned universal. So there is this trick, this famous trick that whatever happened in the West is seen as a universal kind of paradigm, which can then be applied around the world. And Bonilla sort of counter argues and says, I mean, if he observes this, but he also argues that we have to be mindful that constitutional experiences are more diverse, and we have to be careful in assuming unchecked this assumption, assuming this universality of concepts. And so basically pushing back against this, and pushing back to some extent also against the very sort of easy assumption of this sort of international standard of constitutional law, but asking sort of what goes in those ideas of democracy, rule of law, and fundamental rights. What would it mean in different contexts? And a little bit along the lines, or pretty much along the lines of Daniel Bonilla's book, 2015, is then the book that I published together with colleagues in 2020 called The Global South and Comparative Constitutional Law, which built on many decades actually of scholarship that was published in the journal World Comparative Law, which founded in 1968, tried to be a platform for constitutional or public law scholarship from the South. And in that volume that we published in 2020, we also tried to sort of theorize. We try to generalize from those many years of publications and try to understand what is it that needs to be done to have a more global conversation. And that's where we sort of came up with this notion of the southern turn, where we said, okay, we have to somehow make an effort in the comparative constitutional scholarship to take note and to do justice to those types of experiences that emerge from around the world. And so this is where I want to introduce 5 elements, basically, or 5 imperatives, or 5 points where I think our work as comparative scholars should be a little bit sort of reflected and take into account what it would mean to turn south, or what we actually mean is that it's a double turn. It's turning south, but it's also turning north, and ultimately to reach a global conversation. So what I want to point is 5 aspects. The sources about which we speak, number 1. The languages in which we speak is number 2. The methods that we apply is number 3. The time that we take for ourselves to do that, and finally some institutional questions. So let me just explain those 5 points a little bit, and then perhaps the idea of a southern turn more generally becomes clearer. So the first implication, and perhaps the most important for comparative constitutional studies to become more global and more also balanced in the way it treats experiences is basically to sort of think about the sources that we use, think about the epistemic archives that we turn to. And I think it's important to note that until today, when you open any Oxford University Press or Cambridge University Press book from comparative constitutional study, the vast majority of authors and sources that we use stems from the global north. It's just almost like an automatism that we turn to well-known and surely very, very important scholars from the global north. But the point is that we are not really doing justice to scholarship and ideas, to journals and texts that emerge from other places. And that, I think, is in itself sort of a matter of epistemic injustice to some extent. It's just imbalance the way we treat our sort of subjects. But it also comes with a huge loss, I think. It comes with a huge loss of taking note of integrating, using the ideas that emerge in other regions and in other places. So I think somehow the attention to who do we cite, what effort do we make to also find, for example, Southeast Asian, Indonesian authors when we talk about any kind of constitutional doctrine. I guess, I mean, we have very similar problems to some extent. I think the effort is important to go there and do this. And this is then ultimately what one can also call a call to decenter the archives, decenter the ways we source our work about constitutional law. Or to put it in one other formulation, perhaps that's famous, is there's I think a need to provincialize Europe. There's a need to understand that even though these concepts like fundamental rights, this state and many others sound universal, we have to somehow make a better effort to integrate the constitutional experiences in other than European places, to make it a truly global vocabulary, because that, I think it is not. We treat it as universal, but it's ultimately European, and we have to provincialize Europe in that way. So this is the first thing about the sources, pretty much. So who do we cite? Who do we read? Who do we sort of take as also theoretical kind of formats in which we think? The second point is, following on these lines, is about languages. And I think the demand here is for a linguistic pluralism. I mean, I guess Indonesia, I don't have to explain this much, but obviously there are many languages around, and many languages contribute to our understanding of how politics work, how public authority is conceived and justified, how democracy can work or not work, how justice, access to justice takes place or does not take place. And I think we have to sort of be more clear about the dominance of the English language in our conversation, but also about the loss that brings and the techniques to counter this. And I think we have the luck of being in a time of very sort of advanced technologies that can help us to translate into English. I think we don't get around, like I'm not an English native speaker, I'm a German speaker, but we speak in English because we need a lingua franca, I guess. Of course, I acknowledge this and we all know that, but we can still try to learn other languages or use AI and other kind of techniques to translate from those other sources into English, right? And to make an effort to look into, I don't know, French, Dutch, several Indonesian languages to dig up and to provide a larger kind of access into the thinking and experiencing public authority from other sources. So I think that's another imperative to make an effort ultimately, and be also in a way confident enough to say, okay, there's something in the German constitutional language that I think needs to be translated into English, because once it's in English, there is a chance of becoming part of the global conversation. From smaller languages, perhaps less so, but we can claim that also experiences in other languages do matter and can then be brought in. So this was the second imperative, thinking about languages, being mindful of also presenting constitutional ideas from other languages in English. The third point is sort of again following from this is about methodology. I guess many in this audience are sort of comparative scholars, and we are aware of ideas of functionalism, of contextualism, of how to do comparison. And a little bit what I'm saying now is going already in this direction. I think it's kind of obvious that for a comparative study, we need to look at law in context. It's not just about kind of the text. It's not just about the doctrine as it is written, perhaps in a statute or interpreted in judgments. But it's also about understanding the historical, the economic, and the broader context in which this doctrine, in which these judgments appear. And I think from sort of the idea of the Southern perspective of this becoming more global and plural and decentered way, two or three disciplines perhaps stand out that seem to be important. So one is history. I think in its various fields, so political history, economic history, history from below, social history. I think it is very informative to sort of study the law and the doctrine, the judgments that we have in a much broader historical context. And two more, I think, disciplines seem to be less well represented right now, but I think seem to be interesting to me. One is political economy. So trying to understand the constitutional law also in its material dimensions, in the question to what extent it has emerged in the sort of fight between different sort of economic interests and in respect to class and the like. So political economy, I think, is an interesting discipline that can inform our constitutional conversation. And the other one is anthropology. I think it is really an interesting sort of discipline to learn from and to perhaps borrow some methods to sort of do thick descriptions, to sort of look at the way courts operate, the way perhaps justice is understood also in local communities or in certain areas from a more anthropological sort of empirical perspective, and thereby sort of enrich the constitutional conversation. So I think in that way, sort of our methodological arsenal can be broadened, can be pluralized. But I want to add this point with one note, and that is I don't want to relativize, or I don't want to dismiss the value of law as law and of law as doctrine. I think that is I wouldn't sort of leave that out. I think law should have and should be seen as a field of social organization that has a relative autonomy and has a sort of internal rationality. I would never dismiss this. So I think also legal work as doctrinal work is really important to understand and to reflect. I just would complement it. I would put it into a larger kind of context and have the more doctrinal argumentation and analysis of law complemented by more contextual analysis and to have a more holistic perspective. Okay, so this is the third point. And if we take already these 3 points on the sources, the languages and methodologies, if we take them seriously, we easily reach the fourth point that I want to mention, and that is a reflection about time. I think it is almost impossible to do what I describe as a single author in any quick way. And I think sort of we should also just be open about this and acknowledge that good comparative work takes time. In one context, I coined the notion of slow comparison. Obviously as a little sort of ironic, in a slightly ironic or sort of easy way, but in a way to compare with slow food. Basically to say, okay, for good meals, for good tastes to emerge, you sometimes just need time, right? You let it breathing also sort of simmer for some time. And I think the same goes for comparative knowledge and for comparative scholarship. So I think it's of course easy for me as a senior scholar to say that, but also for younger scholars, sort of to provide space and to provide time to do comparative work, to let it kind of emerge and not. And I think it's also just it's a matter of better scholarship and of fairness to factor in that perhaps sometimes patience and slowness can be of advantage. And this is thinking a little bit about institutional setups and also about legal education. As mentioned, I think it's still so that sort of the overall number of prestigious law schools or widely cited journals remain in the north. ICON has a northern origin, but it's not it's sort of northern anymore. But I think we should make an effort, and you are part of this very much, to pluralize also our institutional structures, to have and to think about where, for example, very simple, where do conferences take place? Where do we travel? How do we reimburse those things? So I think that makes a lot of sense to in order to pluralize and enrich the constitutional conversation, to have those small but important institutional aspects in mind. And the final point here is connected to this is about teaching. I think teaching, we are all to some extent teachers of constitutional law. And I think there also we can make an effort to provide materials or to portray constitutionalism and constitutional law as we teach it in a more plural way, in a way that's more decentered, that's not always taking the US or always taking European country as example, but also India, as Kenya or South Africa, Brazil. These are all incredibly rich constitutional traditions and constitutional jurisdictions from which and with which we can compare. And I think already having this in our teaching materials changes the outlook on the world, and to some extent perhaps decenters this the way we think and we inform the next generation in thinking about constitutionalism. Okay, so this is perhaps as much as I wanted to say about the Southern turn. These 5 elements to think about, perhaps to open it up a little more and to decenter it and to have it in a sort of turn it into a more a global conversation. Now, I want to conclude a few minutes just to think about what is also perhaps the potential for Indonesian, Southeast Asian scholarship to break in. And I think that it's not it's not far-fetched to argue that most of the constitutional innovation in the last 20, 30 years has actually taken place outside the North. And it has taken place in the global South. I mean, if we think about the numbers of sort of newly written constitution or sort of more significant constitutional amendments, we are surely finding more of that in the global South. There's more revision and thereby also thinking about constitutionalism in the global South. And I think that's meaningful, because that also means that there is sort of thinking and experimenting, there's testing, there are new ideas from those places. So perhaps 3 or 4 aspects that I want to mention. So one is the thinking about cities. And the constitutional law or the public law of cities, which I think is interesting. I mean, Indonesia, Jakarta is an example, but many of the mega cities of the world are in Asia, and I think there has been quite a bit of dynamic in thinking about the governance of cities, which can inform also constitutional scholarship. Another aspect which I think emerged mostly on the African continent, but has wider sort of repercussions, is thinking about fourth branch institutions, thinking sort of extending our sort of thinking about the separation of powers and the set of branches of government and the way we check on the work of those branches. I think that's another really interesting field of research that can be informed also from our Asian perspective. The military and the role of the military from a constitutional perspective is something which has been largely ignored, but as you perhaps know, the discussion is starting, and I think it's a very important discussion to have, and it's also an important discussion which can be informed by Asian experiences and also experiences of the dangers, the risks, but also perhaps the ways to overcome them. So perhaps that is one more idea. And more generally, I think democracy or the interplay between sort of democracy and authoritarianism. I think there's also a lot to learn from Asian experiences in which the how that interplay takes place and how perhaps one can what formats of democracy might be useful. Also, again, questioning the universality of some doctrines, perhaps, and sort of positioning more local experiences as important experiences that are not substandard or deviations, but just sort of alternatives to perhaps the traditional representative democracy in parliaments or presidential systems as we know it. So another sort of area where I think innovative thinking or the presentation of constitutional experiences and constitutional law from non-Western perspectives can be very useful. Okay, so this is enough. I have talked, I think now half an hour or so, or even more. So I want to come to an end. I just wanted to conclude and say that I'm really happy to see that also in Indonesia now you are forming an institutional context icon which allows us to, I think, engage in conversation, and I think it's a great step forward because I think once we have such institutional links, conversations can more easily happen, and then also knowledge can be more easily decentered and enriched, I would think. And so, yeah, that's it from my side, but I'm happy, of course, to discuss. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Professor Philip Dunn, for your amazing session and presentation. I think what Professor Philip Dunn talked about the comparative constitutional law method these days is really relevant to the phenomenon, especially in adapting the current issues, for example, like the sustainability, the climate change, and as well as how we react to the AI and how we adapt with it. And also, I would like to also sum up of some informations that Professor Philip delivered, that comparative constitutional law is like a new method of law that has been prominent for almost the past decade. And also, we have to make sure that there are 5 elements that we have to aware of in doing the comparative constitutional law. The first one is how we compare the sources, the languages, the method, and the time, and also the institutional structure, as well as it is very important to look how each country constitution can achieve the 3 primary objectives, which are fundamental rights, democracy, and rule of law, as well as it is very relevant to Indonesia, especially Indonesia also has a very long historical background. For example, in the 1998, we have like a reformation after the post-authoritarian regime, and how this historical background affect the constitutional innovations for broader hemisphere, not only in the global south, but also in the north hemisphere. So before I finish the session from Professor Philip Dunn, is there any questions from the audiences that you want to address to Professor Philip? Please raise your hand first, and I will give you the floor. If no, I think I have a questions, Professor Philip.
Sure.
Because I'm also interesting in the comparative constitutional law. And of course, as you mentioned, colonialization is also one of the important factor in how the countries in the global south, give effect on the constitutional making. My question is, for example, in the Southeast Asia region, Thailand is a country that hasn't is never been colonized. So, in your perspective, such country like Thailand, how can the southern turn in the comparative constitutional law can be understood in this context, and what kind of alternative factors that contribute to the constitutional innovation in this case?
Mhm. Yeah, thanks a lot. Very good question. That's of course absolutely correct. The observation that not every country was colonized or was a colonizer, and Thailand
Yeah.
is one example, and
Yeah.
Ethiopia is another one. China is also one to discuss. That is true. But what I would and if one can tell the story of a nation and its political organization in law without turning into colonial legacies, even better. I mean, that's no problem. What I would think is that even countries that might not have been itself colonized often were influenced in their perhaps sort of in their operations, in their sort of self-understandings by the forces of colonialism. If we look into the history of the last 200 years, roughly, this is really one of the dominant shapers, of course, of global encounters. And so I think even a country that itself was not colonized perhaps reacted to demands from Europe, from somehow parts of the world that were seen as more modernized, as more forceful. So take Japan. Japan also itself was not colonized, but the history of Japanese constitutionalism or political history cannot be written without understanding its encounter with the West in the 19th century. It's been still the force, I think, of the sort of modernity, of modern capitalism has been so strong that almost every country needed to position itself in a certain way. And whether this was through external influence directly or indirectly is perhaps is an important kind of aspect, but it's perhaps secondary because every country still sort of had to position itself in modernity, in a globalizing world. And I think in that sense, I would think of colonial legacies not necessarily in a very direct way, to what extent a colonial law perhaps persists or has been rewritten or the like, but also in this broader way of understanding the way certain sort of ideas float, certain sort of issues are framed, and from where and when. So yeah, but it's a good point. I mean, there are countries which are non-colonized, and I think that is also an very interesting avenue of research to ask sort of how did they operate and how did they write their own political and constitutional history. Yeah.
I think I do absolutely agree, Professor Philip, because if we look into Indonesia also has a very strategic background, not only in terms of like the locations and how the historical background, but also some other aspects. For example, the Islamic law as well as the customary law, they acculturate together in terms of the constitution and how the constitutional bodies also effects in the making process of it. So I think we have a questions from Mr. Damian Agata, our co-chairs. So please.
Good afternoon. Oh, sorry. Good morning, Professor. So one of the things that caught my attention from your speech is about the tension between the universalism and particularism in constitutionalism. And so my question would be, as technology increasingly influence governance and constitutional process, especially AI, does this digitalization push constitutionalism towards greater universalism, or can it be designed to strengthen the local constitutional expression and diversity? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So I think you are rightly pointing out, if I understand you correctly, into the so interesting kind of two directions in which we are pulled at the same time. Because I agree that probably with tools like AI or the internet, through which we are able to talk here right now, there is a universalizing kind of dynamic, because we become part of a global conversation. We exchange ideas more quickly. We can interact, and obviously that then creates a certain universalism, that creates a certain kind of global conversation, which I think is good. But at the same time, yes, I think we can still insist that not everything is the same. We can insist on the local experiences, on the value of the distinct experiences also in constitutionalism from our localities. Because I do think that constitutional systems are always fragile. I mean, at least we see this now, how easily perhaps also a constitutional paradigm that we thought is very much settled, liberal democracy to some extent, is under strain. Even in the US, even in France, even in Germany, where one would have thought, okay, this is a really settled matter. So, and I think sort of our system is really under stress, and we have to think about how can we make it more resilient, how can we protect it, and I think the sort of what many people sense also in the European countries, but also in countries of the global South, is that there are local traditions which are worth sort of preserving and worth sort of developing. And so in that sense, I think it's also a step to make our constitutional systems more resilient, to shape them in light of local experience and build on the local experiences that we have. And so I think that's what I would respond. I mean, even though we have a more global conversation and a universal kind of perspectives to some extent, I think we can gain if we give room and see it as justified to also have local solutions, right? And have more local kind of understandings. Yeah, thanks.
So where do we draw the line? I mean, if we, how do we determine which local values that is worth protecting or worth promoting? Should we use the lenses of the universal values of the constitutionalism? Would it be not putting the local values like below or less valuable compared to the universal values? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think one has to discuss this in respect to more concrete questions now, more concrete doctrines. Sort of how do we organize elections? How do we understand freedom of expression? How do we understand perhaps decentralization, federalism, and the like? So I think one would have to look into more concrete constellation to answer your questions about where to draw the line. But what I wanted to kind of encourage or strengthen is somehow to be proud of and to be confident to say, no, we have certain local traditions that seem to work here and that are important. And so yeah, I mean, yeah, I lack now the concrete knowledge about Indonesia, but I think so perhaps about sort of the multitude of languages or the way we organize federalism. I think one can, I mean, polities are conceivable of that are multilingual and that don't have to sort of adhere to a certain standard of nation stateness, which emerged in the European 18th and 19th century, which I guess pushed for one national language as the norm. Or sort of for a certain way of organizing the political party system in a certain way that prioritizes ideologies over other forms of political allegiance. So I think one would, in order to answer your question more precisely, I think one would have to go into a more particular area. But I think I would, to have a concrete drawing of the line. But I'm just very hesitant to say, okay, sort of fundamental rights, democracy, and rule of law are just the standard. That is just, to me, on a very abstract level. And I think one has to go much further down and see what actually does it mean, the rule of law. I think almost every country has different ways of understanding sort of the organization of courts, procedural means to grant access to justice, and the like. And so I would just sort of encourage that thinking from the home base. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Philip. I think your point is in preserving the global awareness on the constitutional life is also important to adopt and to transform it into the local values in terms of raising the global consciousness, if I can call it. So I think the session is already up. It's already finished. Again, on behalf of the ICONS Indonesia, the co-chairs, I as the secretary, as also the advisory boards of all the ICONS Indonesia, Professor Philip, would like to say thank you very much for your time, your willingness, and then also your amazing presentations. It's very insightful and engaging. So before it, there is an appreciation thing from ICONS Indonesia for you. So thank you so much, Professor
Thank
Philip.
you. Yeah. Thank you, Bernhard, for inviting me and for everybody to come online and listen to me and engage perhaps with the ideas. I wish you all the very best for ICONS Indonesia, and hopefully we'll encounter each other, meet each other at some point, and can further discuss these issues. So all the very best, and see you soon.
Thank you so much, Professor Philip, and see you soon. Stay keep in touch. Cheers, Morgan. Bye.
All right, thank you very much for the first lecture session with Professor Philip Dan and Mr. Nicholas Singarimbun LM as the moderator. We'll now proceed to our next lecture session with Professor Mariano Carlos Melero, which will be moderated by Dr. Muhammad Nofrizal Bahar as our moderator, who is also currently serving in the advisory board of ICONS Indonesian Chapter. I will now invite Dr. Muhammad Nofrizal Bahar to lead the second lecture session.
Thank you very much, Fernanda. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, all professors, the founders, and the members of advisory board of ICONS Indonesia, and also to all participants of this historical grand launching session. It is an honor for me to take a part as moderator, of course, of one of our honorable speakers. Let me introduce first myself. My name is Muhammad Nofrizal Bahar. I work as a law lecturer at the Department of Constitutional Law of the Faculty of Law, Universitas Indonesia. Additionally, I also teach at the Department of European Studies at the Graduate School of Sustainable Development of the same university. And without further ado, I would now like to introduce our next speaker, Professor Mariano Carlos Melero de la Torre, by reading his brief CV. Professor Melero de la Torre was born in Barcelona in 1964. He is now a professor of philosophy of law at the Universidad Autónoma de Madrid. Previously, he held the position of professor of political theory at the Universidad Carlos III de Madrid. He holds a degree in philosophy from the Universidad Complutense de Madrid and a degree in law from the Universidad Nacional de Educación Distancia, or UNED, National Distance Education University. He additionally earned a PhD in philosophy from UNED in 2005 and a PhD in law from Universidad Carlos III de Madrid in 2017. He has undertaken research stays at the Universities of Toronto, University of Toronto in 2012 and Bristol in 2016. His research has been published in leading academic journals, including Ratio Juris in the UK, Isonomia in Mexico, Doxa in Spain, Global Constitutionalism in UK, and Revista de Derecho Constitucional in Spain, among others. He's also the author of two monographs, respectively, on John Rawls' political liberalism and on the Commonwealth model of constitutional justice. He is currently involved in two research projects, one addressing emerging political rights and another focusing on ecological justice and new vulnerabilities. Professor Mariano C. Melero de la Torre, you will have maximum 45 minutes to deliver your presentation, and then we will continue with a key question and answer session for about 15 minutes. And ladies and gentlemen, I now proudly present our next honorable speaker, who will deliver a topic of discussion on revisiting the idea of non-liberal constitutionalism. And Professor Melero de la Torre, now the time is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Hello, selamat siang. I would like to share my presentation. I think I can do it here. Let me here. I think I'm sharing now the presentation. So yes, I want to express my gratitude to the organizers of this conference, and in particular, Rosa Ristavoti and Bernard Nicolas, for inviting me to give this paper at the grand launching of ICON Indonesia. Well, the title of the paper is, as you can see, revisiting the idea of non-liberal constitutionalism. And I would like to start. I will continue by discussing some issues that Professor Philip Dan has already addressed here. And I would like to start with some genuine questions. The first is, is it possible to establish liberal democracies worldwide? And the second is, is it desirable? The first question has to do with how or to what extent, or the extent to which we can realize human rights is a matter of expectation. And the second question, if that is desirable, has to do with the question of what can we aspire in terms of human rights? What can we hope? If liberal democracy provides the strongest protection of human rights, human individual rights, should we not aim for its universal expansion? But they are genuine questions for me. That is something that I think a lot. And I think it's a good opportunity for me to discuss these questions in a chapter with people from Indonesia. I think it's a really good opportunity. I am really grateful for this opportunity. Well, on the one hand, tolerance and respect both are liberal principles. require acknowledgement of cultural pluralism and different political cultures. And not all of political cultures in the world are founded on liberal values. Liberal values such as individual autonomy, reflective agency, or the concept of individuals as self-originating sources of valid claims. On the other, constitutional democratic institutions require certain cultural preconditions in order to function properly. Besides, the right to self-determination is prior to democracy. The right to self-determination is prior because every political community has the right to decide its own political and legal order without external interference. This right includes, crucially, the capacity to decide whether to establish democratic institutions, and if so, of what kind, competitive democracy, single-party democracy, or otherwise. So my thesis, what is my thesis? My thesis is that many of the countries classified as flawed democracies in the Economist Intelligent Unit's Democracy Index are communitarian societies, in which a majority of individuals identify primarily with ethnic or religious groups, and only secondarily with their role as equal citizens. For such societies, liberal constitutionalism should not serve as the primary standard for evaluating political institutions. Nevertheless, constitutional protections against tyranny and repression must be always upheld. I will argue that tolerating non-liberal political cultures or communitarian political cultures leads to a form of constitutionalism that is less demanding than individual rights-based liberal justice, yet represents an accessible and reasonable demanding standard, one that can be met by communitarian democracies without requiring them to abandon their associationist character. I propose to explore the idea of non-liberal constitutionalism as a standard of decency for determining when such societies ought to be regarded as equals alongside liberal democracies within a reasonable society of peoples. In developing this argument, I draw freely on some ideas from Rawls' The Law of Peoples. So let's start with Rawls. Perhaps the most influential and widely criticized theorist of constitutional democracy. Well, this author thought that extending constitutional democracy worldwide in the liberal form familiar in Western societies is neither feasible nor desirable. Liberal constitutional democracies should recognize and respect decent non-liberal societies as equal participating members in good standing of the society of peoples. So in my perspective, this idea of decent non-liberal societies, this Rawlsian idea of decent non-liberal societies, can be seen as a way of extending key elements of constitutionalism, such as rights, political legitimacy, public justification, into the law of peoples in international relations. So let's take a look at the main ideas of liberal constitutionalism according to Rawls. According to this author, the Constitution is a case of imperfect procedural justice. First, this means that first, the Constitution must establish a just procedure, satisfying the requirements of equal liberty. including, when applied to political decision-making, the principle of equal political participation. Second, the Constitution must be designed so that among the feasible just arrangements, it is more likely than any alternative to generate a just and effective system of legislation over time. So this is usually called the instrumentalist argument for a democracy, a constitutional democracy, is the most likely institutional arrangement to result in a just and an effective system of legislation. So equal liberty is the moral foundation of democratic institutions, equal of free people, free persons, equals in regarding his freedom, is the moral foundation of democratic institutions, and democratic institutions in turn are the arrangements, the institutional arrangement, most likely to satisfy the requirements of equal liberty, a society of free and equal people. So we can resume the normative structure of a liberal democracy with the following four components. First, free elections, understood as equal political freedoms and fair electoral competition. Second, the rule of law, which refers to the formal and structural elements of a legal system and secures formal justice. Third, the equality of individual rights and freedoms, that is the idea that persons are equally able to self-governing, with equal power to form, review, and transform their own rational plans of life, which grounds principle of substantive justice. And finally, the separation of powers, realized through representative government, constitutional review, and institutional checks and balances. Constitutional democracy ideally involves not just elections, but things like stable rule of law, robust protection of individual rights, including minority rights, functioning institutions, media freedom, entrenched checks and balances, and political culture supporting liberal individualism. This is what we can call the essence of a constitutional theory of democracy. According to a Rorschanian author, a follower of Rawls, if you want, Joshua Cohen, democracy refers not only to a form of politics, but also describes a type of society, generally characterized by conditions of equality, a society of equals, with equal rights and equal status, whose members relate to one another as equals. The fact that we, according to this author, according to Cohen, the fact that we speak of democracy both as a form of society and as a form of political regime expresses a discovery, not a mistake. The discovery is the understanding that a democratic political system expresses in the design of its institutions, especially at the highest level of political authority, the conception of its members as equal persons, worthy of equal respect. Equality grounded in individuals' political capacity is the foundation of democratic society and of a democratic regime. Moreover, the connections between a democratic society and a democratic political system operate in both directions. These are words by this author, Joshua Cohen. So knowing more or less what is the structure, the normative structure of a democratic society, we can go further and see what non-liberal societies are. Well, according to Rawls, they are associationist in character. In non-liberal societies, the members are viewed in public life as members of different groups. And each group is represented in the legal system by a body in a decent consultation hierarchy. Another famous paragraph of the Law of People, the Law of Peoples, Rawls says, a decent hierarchical society's conception of the person does not require acceptance of the liberal idea that persons are citizens first and have equal basic rights as equal citizens. Rather, it views persons as responsible and cooperating members of their respective groups. Hence, persons can recognize, understand, and act in accordance with their moral duties and obligations as members of these groups. So for Rawls, non-liberal societies are hierarchical peoples in which it is not possible to establish democratic procedures for public decision-making. My focus here is on a particular type of flawed democracy. So my focus is not on non-liberal societies as such, as defined by John Rawls, but with a particular type of flawed democracy in which the social structure is shaped primarily by non-liberal ethnic and religious groups, while the political system operates within a framework grounded in the principles of constitutional democracy. So they have a framework under the principles of constitutional democracy, but the social structure is shaped by these non-liberal ethnic and religious groups. Well, I will argue that these so-called flawed democracies and even hybrid regimes should not be assessed by the standards of liberal constitutionalism. The focus must be in the constitutional protections, checks and balances, opposition institutionalized, independent courts, more than in whether there are or not competitive free elections. So in this slide, I would like to share what is this democratic index of the Economist, where they divide or they categorize like 4 types of democracies. The last one is an autocracy indeed, but the first one would be the consolidated constitutional democracy that I have been taught recently, the normative structure or architecture of these constitutional democracies. Then the flawed democracy would be one liberal democracy where elections are free and fair and basic civil rights are respected, but the country has significant weakness in other aspects of democracy, such as governmental functioning, political participation, or political culture. Then we have they talk about hybrid regimes, where elections are meaningful, but liberties are restricted, and the system is defective, but not fully authoritarian. Poor protection for civil liberties, rule of law, judicial independence, press freedom, and overall institutional checks and balances are, poor, low. And then we have the autocracy, electoral autocracy or competitive authoritarianism, no longer democratic. They have elections, but they are only formal elections. But elections exist, but are not free and competitive enough. Opposition cannot realistically obtain power, okay? So more or less with these categories, we are moving now to the constitutionalism. No? We are talking about flawed democracies, and then we are trying to discover what this idea of liberal constitutionalism. And for that, I would like to start defining a little bit what constitutionalism is, no? And constitutionalism is previous to liberalism, previous to the Enlightenment century. Charles Howard McElwain wrote a book in 1940 called Constitutionalism, Ancient and Modern. And he says, in all its successive phases, constitutionalism has one essential quality. It is a legal limitation on government. It is the antithesis of arbitrary rule. Its opposite is democratic government, the government of will instead of law. The most ancient, the most persistent, and the most lasting of the essentials of true constitutionalism still remains what it has been almost from the beginning, the limitation of government by law. Okay, with this idea, the main idea of what constitutionalism is, we can define a little better the requirements of constitutionalism. Well, according to Graham Walker wrote a very famous and controversial paper called The Idea of Non-Constitutionalism in 1996 in the journal Nomos, dedicated the volume to ethnicity and group rights. And he said in that paper, the appeal of constitutionalism now and in previous eras seems precisely to lie in its capacity to ward off tyranny by structuring public life and institutions in a way that keeps them accountable, general public. So we can infer from this definition, these ideas of constitutionalism, two kinds of constitutional requirements or two kinds of limitations, constitutional limits. The first kind is structural limits. So some kind of institutional devices that thwart concentrations of power or avoid concentrations of power and keep power holders accountable. So accountability, a process of accountability, a process to take public decisions, taking everybody into account, is the first aspiration, the first requirement of constitutionalism. Processes of including, for example, bicameralism, enumerated powers. There are constitutions in the world where powers have very fixed prerogatives or powers or competences. Separated powers or overlapping powers, as the American checks and balances system, judicial review, constitutional review, federalism or mechanism of popular participation, of course, elections, voting. All of these are structural limits, the constitutional structural limits. And the second kind of requirements are aspirational limits. First, the absence of aggressive aims externally, and internally, a common good conception of justice where the interest of every member of society counts. So what is searching for constitutionalism is the social integration instead of autonomy as the principal aim. No? Is searching for social integration around a common good conception of justice. In this sense, it can be fulfilled under democratic institutions or with what Rawls call a decent constitutional hierarchy. So with this idea of the constitutional requirements, we can ask now, to what extent do consolidate constitutional democracies of our time fulfill the two requirements of constitutionalism? So it makes sense to ask this question because of course, in reality, actually, the so-called consolidate constitutional democracies not necessarily comply or fulfill the requirements of constitutionalism. In fact, according to Luigi Ferrajoli, a prominent philosopher of legal or normative constitutionalism, and an important defender of strong judicial review, he says in so-called well-functioning democracies, there is a weakening of the subjection of public authorities to the law, the oversight of the legality of their actions, and their orientation towards the protection and realization of constitutionally guaranteed rights. All of these problems have to do with structural limits. And the second, he says, in this consolidated constitutional democracies, there is a deterioration in the representative character of political systems, that is, their capacity to represent society and to realize the majority will. Well, there is we can say, a deterioration to the capacity of democratic institutions to govern in accordance with a common good conception of justice that takes into account the interests of all on equal basis. So as we can see here, in these so-called consolidated democracies, there are a lot of problems to respond, to fulfill the requirements of constitutionalism. But what happened with the non-liberal societies, communitarian democracies? Well, okay. To respond to this question, or to answer this question, I would like to start with the decent non-liberal societies, of what Rawls and Joshua Cohen says about these decent non-liberal societies, and then I will try to apply all these ideas to our focus of interest, these communitarian democracies. Well, according to Rawls and Cohen, a society is self-determining in a morally significant sense if its political arrangements satisfy three minimum conditions. First, political decisions must be the result of a process in which the interests of all are represented and taken into account, even if not on an equal basis. Second, its institutions must protect the right of any individual to dissent. And third, public authorities and officials must explain their decisions in terms of a conception of the common good that is widely held by the population, what Rawls calls a conception of justice based on the common good. Okay, well, the Rawlsian standard of decency, I think, is invoking the two kind of limitations of constitutionalism. The two first conditions have to do with structural limits, specifically the decent consultation hierarchy for the political decision-making process and the right to dissent. In communitarian societies, there is no guarantee that democratic institutions will produce better outcome than consultative hierarchical organs. So this is more or less the idea. It's not necessary in this kind of societies where this kind of non-cultural groups, ethnic, religious groups, that democratic institutions will produce better outcome in terms of human rights than consultative hierarchical organs. The third condition concern of these Russian standards, the third Russian standard concerns aspirational limits. First, no aggressive aims in external relations, and internally, the upholding of a scheme of social cooperation for mutual benefit, what calls roles a common good conception of justice. Well, roles didn't presuppose the existence of actual, decent, hierarchical peoples, any more than he presupposes the existence of actual, reasonable, just, constitutional, democratic people. But he had in mind an idolized Islamic people named Afghanistan with no separation of church and state. Well, our focus here is not on, as I said, not on liberal societies, but on communitarian democracies. As I said, in these democracies, they have institutional democracy, institutional democratic institutions, but at the same time, they have this non-liberal social structure. So here we can define the two constitutional requirements in this sense, more or less. I called decent, if they fulfill these two requirements, we can call them decent communitarian democracies. The first kind of conditions are structural limits. They should have democratic procedures of public decision-making. They have some protection of civil rights, the rule of law, legality. The power must operate and must function under the rule of law, independent courts, and institutionalized opposition. This part, I think, is crucial, no? Institutionalized opposition. I think the first mark of a dictatorship, authoritarian society, is because the opposition is in jail or abroad, no, out of the country. Is a mark, a very clear mark of autocracy. And regarding aspirational limits, as in this kind of communitarian democracies, there must be a common good conception of justice based on communitarian values that emphasize social harmony, collective responsibility, tradition, hierarchy, and belonging. Well, to understand, or that's what I want to think, to facilitate the understanding of this idea, I would like to present to provide an example. And the example is the Indonesians Pancasila. I don't know how to pronounce it very well. Sorry about this, but it could be Pancasila or something like this. No, so the Indonesian system of religious freedom is guaranteed as part of a generally stable and peaceful constitutional order, but doesn't respond to liberal requirements. It is not based on individual freedom of conscience, but on toleration between ethnic religious groups. It allows pluralism among recognized religions, but it doesn't fully protect freedom of thought, especially the right to dissent, reinterpret doctrine, or reject religion altogether. but as I put here, no, the Indonesian Pancasila has these constitutional principles that I think they are a very good example of what I think is should be the non-liberal constitutionalism. Principles such as social harmony. In Indonesian, I don't want to pronounce this or to read these names in Indonesian because I don't want to make mistakes here. But social harmony, unity in diversity, collective deliberation with a consensus-oriented deliberation, and moral cooperation. I think that they are very good examples of what could be non-liberal constitutionalism. Well, one key role of constitutionalism is to provide, as this Pancasila shows that one key role of constitutionalism is to provide a framework through which rival moralities and social groups can coexist. However, in democratic societies, it is more likely that cases of internal division will emerge. Of course, in the idealized Islamic society of Kazakhstan with roles, there is an unanimity that doesn't exist in the real world. To be sure, Rawls does take this lack of internal unanimity into account when he includes among the conditions of legitimacy of collective autonomy the capacity of individuals to dissent from collective decisions, at least to a certain point, to a certain extent, the capacity of individuals to dissent. The difficulty, however, is that in Rawls' conception, dissenting voices must be heard in a manner appropriate to the religious and philosophical values of the society as expressed in its idea of the common good. That is, within the basic framework of the idea of justice grounded in the common good. Well, there is therefore no place in Rawls' decent hierarchical societies for protest against the prevailing values of the majority. Women, for example, may have their representatives in the procedure for collective decision-making and express their disagreement with certain collective decisions. But they would not have the opportunity to challenge certain traditional practices and values that, in their view, violate their rights and that they believe cannot be justified by appealing to the fact that certain behaviors or beliefs are common in their society. So these internal divisions can emerge easily in a democratic society, easier than in a hierarchy, in a decent hierarchical society. So we are talking about democratic societies, communitarian democratic societies. And there, I think we can add an additional requirement of democracy in non-liberal constitutionalism. So therefore, I think we have to make a step forward, to go a little bit forward to Rawls, because in these hierarchical societies, even if they are in a way, if they can be decent, there are not ways to express some kind of dissent with the communitarian idea of the common good. Therefore, non-liberal constitutionalism should include standards of minimum democracy, not grounded in the equality of participatory rights, but rather in the principle of public justification or accountability. I think this is very important to add in non-liberal constitutionalism, some democratic institutions, not fully, but some kind of democracy is very important. And this means three kind of requirements. First, legislative power should be vested in representative institutions operating under the majoritarian principle. So the legislation must be made by representative powers. Secondarily, government should be responsive and subject to periodic free elections. So this is another thing that we have in these democratic communitarian democracies. And there must be a glimpse of institutional security for the exercise of the freedom of expression, association, and assembly, necessary for reasonably free deliberation about political decisions. I think that is very important to add this kind of freedoms, no? Even if they are not liberal in the Western sense of the word, I think that in this non-liberal constitutionalism, there must be these kinds of freedoms, democratic freedoms, no? Freedoms linked to democracy. Well, I have left to finish. I have left for the end a provision that rolls states in passing, but which is no less important for being obvious. A decent hierarchical society, like a decent communitarian democracy, like in constitutional democracies, liberal constitutional democracies, all of these societies are viable, provided that their rulers do not allow themselves to be corrupted, either by favoring the rich or by enjoying the exercise of power for itself. But this is applicable to all societies, all kind of constitutional societies. So thank you very much, Terima kasih banyak, for your attention. And that's all that I have to present. So I will be very happy to dialogue with you if you want with your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Melero de la Torre, for your amazing and very interesting presentation. And ladies and gentlemen, in his presentation, as he explained previously, Professor Melero de la Torre have actually tried to answer the questions on, first, the possibility to establish liberal democracies worldwide, and is it desirable? And second, how far can human rights be realized and what can we aspire to in terms of human rights? And the last issue he raised was, if liberal democracy provides the strongest protection of basic individual rights, should we not aim for its universal expansion? This topic is certainly very interesting for Indonesia, which applied a unique system of democracy that we call as Demokrasi Pancasila, as mentioned by the speaker, where the principle of liberal democracy has been adapted and adjusted with many indigenous cultures of nation. Probably the audience can raise a question on this matter. Let us see. And now, if there is any question from the audience for the next 15 minutes, we will open the question and answer session. For the audiences who are raising the question, please kindly mention your name and institution. Okay, now we open the question and answer session. Maybe from the student. I see some students from the University of Erlangga, the student of Ibu Rosa.
Yes, excuse me, sir. I raised my hand.
Okay, Andra, yeah?
Yeah.
Andra,
So,
okay,
good
please
everyone.
mention your institution.
Thank you so much. So first of all, my name is Andra. I'm from Universitas Erlangga. Thank you for the compelling lecture, Professor. And my question is, you mentioned about Pancasila. So as you identified Pancasila as reflecting communitarian constitutional values such as social harmony and also what we recognize in Indonesia such as gotong royong or working together. Does Indonesia represent a successful example of non-liberal or communitarian constitutionalism, or does it oscillate between liberal and non-liberal models? Thank you. That's it.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrea, for your question. I think it's I don't want to say a little very much about this because if it's successful or not successful, I'm not an expertise on these questions of Indonesia's constitutionalism. So maybe you and your colleagues are more prepared to answer this question. What I would like, what I'd like to present, Pascasila, is an example of what non-liberal constitutionalism could be. No, if in fact is a successful example, I don't know, but it's the perfect example of what would be a constitutionalism not based on individual or liberal values. Okay, so it's more tolerance between groups, and that's is the essence of non-liberal constitutionalism. That's why I present this example. But the successful of the success of the model, I'm not want to venture there. I'm not prepared to respond that question. Thank you.
Hi, Professor. My name is Damien from Universitas Indonesia. So in your presentation, you said that there are several criteria of minimum democracy, majoritarian representative institutions, periodic elections, and formal protection of few civil liberties, all of which Indonesia appears to meet all the institutional criteria. However, many observers would say that democratic quality in Indonesia is now declining. So how do we explain the paradox that democratic substance appear to be weakening rather than strengthening? Does this suggest that minimum standards are insufficient to prevent democratic erosion, or that public justification itself can be used to legitimize illiberal outcomes?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your question, Wikak. This is the essence of my presentation. That problem, really. I think that if we assess countries such as Indonesia according to the liberal Western democracy parameters, yes, it's easier. It's easier to classify the Indonesia as a flawed democracy or this decreasing decreasing level of democratic guarantees in the country. What I wanted to present here is a different way to assess this kind of countries, like your country, Indonesia or Malaysia, all these Asian, South Asian countries. I think that can be presented in a better way, no? Talking more about constitutionalism than in terms of democracy. I think that democracy is important, but in terms of the possibility to express dissenting point of views, but at the same time, all the constitutional framework that in these countries exist is a very important, very valuable feature that we don't have to ignore. No, but always when we assess this kind of countries from a liberal point of view, is when we see this kind of decreasing or backsliding of these democratic guarantees. That is what I would like, I wanted to express in my presentation, at least. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, is there another question?
Hello, Mr.
Yeah.
Nofrizal.
Yes,
Wichak
you're
here.
from Wichat?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, you can raise your question.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Nofrizal. Thank you. I just want to give a follow-up questions from Mr. Damian before. I believe there is another typology of constitutionalism emerging today where democratic society practice democracy only in a procedural sense rather than adhering to substantial constitutional values. So I think this phenomenon does not stem from the society's acceptance of non-liberal values, but rather occur as a result of the manipulations of law by political elites. I think we are currently witnessing this in countries like Hungary, for example, and Poland, and maybe in Indonesia as well, where political actors have, I would say, utilized and weaponized democratic institutions for authoritarian ends. I think it's happened like not only in countries that I mentioned before, and it becomes a global phenomenon, I would say. So my questions to you, Professor, is do you think this trend will continue in the future and eventually become a distinct typology of a new democracy? Thank you very much.
Okay, wow, this is a very, very difficult question. The trend in the world. Well, yes, I think that is we have a big erosion in constitutional democracies in general, worldwide. It's evident that we have an erosion. That's why it's very important to reinforce the ideas of constitutionalism. Democratic or more or less democratic, but with a certain focus on the limits government, the limitations of government. The opposition institutionalized, the rule of law, independent judges, all checks and balances, institutional checks and balances, all of these measures of constitutionalism, I think that is a good barrier, a good obstacle to put against this wave of authoritarianism or autocratarianism that is why we are weakening. We are seeing now today, no, in many countries in the world. In Western societies, we are seeing. Yeah, I have been talking about this in my presentation that we have in Europe, in the United States, in many countries, many Western countries, that we are seeing an erosion in institutions, and in non-Western or non-liberal societies, I think it is happening as well. So, but when we are talking about recipes or some kind of solutions to this trend, I think we have to focus more in constitution and constitutional limits than in a process of more democratization or more representative powers. I think this is important, of course, the democratic aspects of our societies, but I think it's even more important, more crucial to reinforce the constitutional limits of government. This is my opinion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Melero. We still have time, yeah, because we should finish at 4 o'clock for this session. Is there another question from the audience? Yeah, if there's no more question, then before we close this session, as a gratitude from the organizing committee, ICON-S Indonesia Chapter will present a certificate of appreciation to Professor Mariano Carlos Melero de la Torre. Professor Melero, could you please stop share screen from your computer so we can watch the certificate of appreciation
I
presented
think,
by the
oh,
organizing
okay,
committee.
sorry. Yeah, now.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Oh, okay,
Okay.
thank you. There is a little mistake with my first name, second name is Celeiro, it's Melero, no? Well, yeah, there is
Yeah.
a mistake, little mistake there, but mhm.
Yeah, we're sorry. It should be Mariano Carlos Melero, right?
Yeah. But
Okay.
Carlos is my second name, Mariano
Yeah.
Carlos, but the family name is Melero and is Celeiro is there. Well, okay, doesn't matter. Thank you very much anyway.
Okay,
Yeah,
we will correct it later. Okay,
yeah,
we're sorry for this.
okay.
Okay, and then now we have come to the conclusion of this session. On behalf of
I could like,
uh,
sorry, I would like to wish you again the all success for the future in this icon Indonesia, like icon chapter in Indonesia. Okay, so I wish you the best. Mhm.
okay, muchas gracias. Okay, finally, Professor Mariano Carlos Melero de la Torre, on behalf of ICON as Indonesia chapter, once again, I would like to express our high appreciation and gratitude for your presentation. And to the audience, honorable ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your kind attention. And now I will give back the screen back to the master of ceremony. Good afternoon.
All right, thank you very much for the second lecture with Professor Mariano Carlos Melero with the moderator Dr. Muhammad Nofrizal Bahar. Before we move on to the next lecture, we would like to also show our gratitude by uh, showing the certificate for Mr. Moderator, Mr. Dr. Muhammad Nofrizal Bahar, LLM, which will be presented on your screen. Thank you very much for
Thank you very
your
much.
contributions in today's event.
Thank you.
All right, now we will move on to our third lecture session with Professor Marietta Safta, which will be moderated by Dr. Yance Arizona as our moderator, who is also currently serving in our advisory board. I will now invite Dr. Yance Arizona to lead the third lecture session. All right, welcome, Mr. Dr. Yance Arizona, as our
Hello, good
moderator.
afternoon. Yeah,
Yes, you may start the third lecture session with Professor
okay,
Marietta Safta. Thank you.
okay, moment, please, because I have a bit of problem with my computer to open file. Moment. Okay, thank you. So we will continue our session today. This time we have opportunity to meet with Professor Marietta Safta. Yeah, so glad that Professor Marietta already here to share with us here with all of the colleagues from the Icons Indonesia. So Professor Marietta Safta is a professor and also teaching constitutional law, political institution in European constitutional law and constitutional justice in the EU at Titu Morescu University in Bucharest. She is also a member of Doctoral School of Law at the Bucharest University Economic Studies, associate professor at the University of Bucharest. And so today she will talk about how should court interpret constitutional amendment limits, emerging theories in multi-level systems. So we have a time until 5 p.m. in Indonesian time, and so Prof. Marietta will have time to provide lecture around 45 minutes maximum, and then after that we will continue with the question and answer. So Professor Marietta, now I give an opportunity for you to begin the lecture.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning from Romania. Dear colleagues, dear professors, and dear students, because I've noticed that we have in the audience also students, and I'm very happy for this. It is a joy for me to be here today at such a special moment for the public law research community of Indonesia, launching ICON as Indonesia chapters. Indonesia is a country with which I feel very closely connected. I have visited Indonesia twice, first a few years ago on the occasion of the World Congress of Constitutional Justice hosted by the Constitutional Court of Indonesia, where I participated on behalf of my court, of my Constitutional Court of Romania, as an assistant magistrate, first assistant magistrate in the court. It was an experience I remember with great appreciation for the excellent organization, the high quality of the debates, and the remarkable hospitality. And later I visited your country as a tourist, admiring your amazing cultural heritage. Over the years, I remained in close connection and collaboration with Indonesian professors and experts in constitutional law. I truly value this ongoing and productive exchange of knowledge, ideas, and perspective. So I'm therefore truly honored to have been invited to this event, and I would like to sincerely thank the organizers for the invitation, and of course to congratulate you all for this amazing event. My intervention today represents in itself a kind of continuity. It builds on the presentation I delivered some time ago, invited by Professor Rosa Ristavati. Thank you so much, dear Professor Rosa. As part of a dissemination of a research project. I've since completed the article developed within the project, and it is the basis of that work that I will share a few reflections today. I very much look forward to your comments and invite you to an open debate and exchange of ideas on these specific topics. And now I will try to share my presentation. Hope that everything is okay for you as well.
Yeah, it's okay.
Can you see? Can you see my
Yeah, we can
screen?
see it.
Okay,
Yes, we can see it.
Thank you so much. The main question in the center of my presentation and my research: how should courts interpret constitutional amendment limits in a multi-level constitutional system? I think that this question is not only a technical one, because it touches on constitutional identity, sovereignty, democratic legitimacy, and especially the role of the courts, of the constitutional courts, in shaping the constitutional meaning, in shaping the constitution as a fundamental law of a country. This problematization essentially seeks to open a debate on the emerging interpretative approaches adopted by the constitutional courts when confronted with limits to constitutional amendment, but not only the limits expressly enshrined in the Constitution, but also other limits, if they exist, within a multi-level legal order. In such context, constitutional adjudication increasingly unfolds at the intersection of national, supranational, international legal orders, challenging the traditional understanding of constitutional supremacy, which usually relates to a national framework, and judicial authority. The analysis is based on my article, The Amendment of Member States' Constitution in Relations to the European Union Legal Order and Constitutional Identity, with a special view on the Romanian experience, published in the Central European Journal of Comparative Law. My intention is to pursue this research, to develop my research on the interpretation of the limits to constitutional amendment. So your comments and your opinion are very, very welcome. First, I will try to explain a bit the main concepts of the research. Multi-level system is one of the central concepts. Here in my research, this concept is related to the European Union legal order. Acknowledging that the very nature of this order as union of states has generated extensive debates concerning its most appropriate legal characterization. There are a lot of studies, a lot of researches trying to discover, trying to emphasize specific characteristic of this sui generis concept of union of states. European Union in itself, it's a one-of-a-kind structure. So there are a lot of opinions in this regard. From the perspective of my research, this idea of multi-level system is important because it takes into account overlapping constitutional orders, the case of European Union, national states, and also European Union as a structure of states, national constitutions, European Union law, especially the treaties, the Treaty of European Union and the functioning of the European Union, and human rights systems, because in European Union we have the national catalogs of human rights, the supranational catalogs of human rights, meaning the European Union Charter of Human Rights, and also we have international catalogs of human rights, like the Convention for the Protection of Human Rights adopted by the Council of Europe, which is different from European Union. And we also have this continuous interaction between courts, the national constitutional courts and European Court of Justice, and of course, European Court of Human Rights, because I will discuss mainly about human rights. So it is not the purpose of my analysis to engage with those debates concerning the characterization of the European Union. The focus lies on constitutional review, understood within a broader framework of normative conditioning, in which national constitutional adjudication operates beyond a purely domestic context. In this sense, multi-level constitutionalism is employed as an analytical lens to capture this interaction between constitutional limits to amend the Constitution and overlapping legal orders without reducing the inquiry to the specificities of European Union constitutional law. Here you have a European Union, which in terms of geography, it's a small place, but it's very complex in terms of history, in terms of the tradition, and also the relationship between legal orders, which determine this complexity in terms of constitutional debates. The analysis, I think it's also relevant not only for Europe, but also for the global level. Insofar as it raises issues of interactions between constitutional courts and international courts entrusted with the regional protection of fundamental rights, like European Court of Human Rights, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, and African Court on Human and People's Rights, an aspect to which particular attention is devoted to how these interactions shape national system of fundamental right protection. I'm aware that in Asian region, we don't have such a court, but it is more interesting to analyze and to see if we have this kind of influence in terms of interpretation, international influence in terms of interpretation of the limits of the amendment of the Constitution. So I have in mind, when I discuss about multi-level system, no single constitutional authority, multiple courts interpreting shared values, especially in order to have a broader relevance, the level of the protection of human rights. The next concept, key concept in my analysis, concerns the limits of the constitutional amendment. In a short definition, I think we can say that the limits of constitutional amendment are a set of intangible values that reflect the original constituent to protect the established constitutional order. These values are explicitly mentioned in some constitutions as revision limits. I will exemplify later with the Romanian constitution, because in my country constitution, these limits of the amendment of the constitution are specifically expressly enshrined in the text of the constitution. There are famous books on this topic, like constitutional amendments, making, breaking, and changing constitution, of Professor Richard Albert, who described the constitutional amendment rules as the gatekeepers to a constitution, showing that they open a window into the soul of the constitution, exposing its deepest vulnerabilities and revealing its greatest strengths. Also, Professor Yaniv Ruzhnai, in his book Unconstitutional Constitutional Amendment, noted that the global trend is moving towards accepting the idea of limitation, explicit or implicit, on constitutional amendment power. There is also a wealth of literature on the topic of constitutionalism, and I will mention here especially a precious initiative to provide an annual worldwide update on this essential issue of constitutionalism in an international review of constitutional reform, which brings together specialists through the world. The last issue is that one, coordinated by Professor Richard Albert and Professor Luis Barroso. I'd like to congratulate once again all the team for the great work, and I know that also the Indonesian researchers in public law, in constitutional law, contribute the chapter to this important publication. Now, the very issue discussing the limits of the amendment of the Constitution, we should be aware that the very issue of the legitimacy of limits to constitutional amendment are contested, as illustrated inter alia by the recent study of Professor Richard Albert. It was published a few days ago. It calls against an amendability, and I have here, I quoted here a part of the abstract because it's very relevant also for our discussion today. Amending a constitution should never be impossible. Yet today, many constitutions are unamendable, including the United States Constitution, perhaps the world's most difficult to amend. Constitutions become unamendable in three ways. First, constitution makers may deliberately shield certain rules or an entire constitution from amendment. Those express limits I discussed. Second, The forces and dynamics of constitutional politics may transform a theoretical amendable constitution into a practically unamendable one. Third, this one is very important for our discussion. Judges may interpret a constitution designed to be amendable as consisting of unwritten rules prohibiting its amendment. The outcome is the same in each of these three cases of unamendability. Incumbents are legally barred from amending their constitution. So I think this perspective and this discussion make it all the more important to analyze the role of constitutional courts in interpreting the Constitution and establishing limits through their own case law, thus influencing the development of constitutionalism not only at the national level, but also across an increasingly global constitutional landscape. You know, from this perspective, it is very famous, the theory of basic structure doctrine, which shows how a court could interpret the limits of the amendment. Even in the Constitution, there are not enshrined such kind of limits. As concerns the European region, the Venice Commission, in report on constitutional amendment, identifies special limitation to constitutional amendments in fundamental laws and distinguishes between two types of constitutions. The first type explicitly renders a limited number of provisions or principles unamendable under any circumstances, the express limits, such as territorial integrity, fundamental rights, the form of government, the structure of state, and so on. The second type operates a distinction between different sets of constitutional provisions, making some harder to change than others through special procedures, for example, higher majorities in the parliament, equivalent to making the provisions unamendable. And also in its study, the Venice Commission highlights the role of constitutional courts interpreting the limits of the constitutional amendments. So also in this area of the concepts and the explanation of the methodology, it is important to discuss a bit about the courts and constitutional review and their interpretation as a creative act. So the main question is, who defines constitutional amendments limits today? The original constituent power in the Constitution or constitutional courts through interpretation, because many constitutional courts have explicitly assumed the competence to review constitutional amendments for compliance with substantive limits. We'll see in my example concerning the Romanian constitution, the constituent power gave constitutional court the power to review these constitutional amendments and to guarantee the limits of the amendment of the Constitution. In their case law, the courts do not simply apply clear textual limits. Rather, they engage in interpretive constructions that define the content of the limits of the amendment of the Constitution, the scope of unamendable principles, and the permissible extent of constitutional change. In this sense, judicial interpretation became, we can say that it became a kind of constitutive act shaping the very boundaries of the constitutional evolutions. As concerns the specificity of the European Union, I underline here that the courts attach to the limits of the amendment of the Constitution the concept or the characteristic of identity values. This concept is seen in the light of the Article 4 of the Treaty of European Union, according to which the Union shall respect the equality of member states before the treaties, as well as their national identities. Alternatively, at the European Union level, the values provided in Article 2 of the Treaty of the European Union or identified by the European Court of Justice as the very identity of the European Union as a common legal order. So we have 27 constitutional identity of the member states, and we have also the identity, the constitutional identity of the European Union. This implies that the European constitutional order is based on a set of intangible elements that must be protected using similar instruments. European Court of Justice protecting the constitutional identity of the European Union, and constitutional courts, national courts protecting the identity, constitutional identity of the member states. Articulation, which gives meaning to the very development of the European Union as a structure of states, is mainly achieved through the judicial interpretation of the fundamental values included in the European Union treaties and member states' constitution. And once again, the importance of the constitutional review of the limits of the amendment of the Constitution. So, a few research questions. The practical consequences of this obligation assumed by the member state of the European Union when they became member of this structure state. Does it establish a new limit to the revision of the member state's constitution? If yes, what would this limit consist of, and how does it interfere or integrate into national constitutionalism? Are we still talking about a cornerstone of the member state constitution, or continuous and plasticity influenced by the definition that the common values acquire at various times? Because these limits of the amendment determine a rigidity of the constitution. Do we have this rigidity in terms of the relationship in this kind of complex legal orders? Who ultimately has the authorities to determine the meaning of these common values as a normative core of a common legal order? The discussion may be conducted with reference to any of the explicit or implicit limits of constitutional revision. However, in my presentation, I'll focus on fundamental rights as limits to constitutional amendments, because they are significant also in for other legal orders, not the specific order of European Union as Union of States. Let's analyze first these core values of the European Union. I called them limits of the amendment of the European Union treaties and the role of European Court of Justice in this regard. As concerned the very characterization of the European Union, I used the case law of European Court of Justice in Opinion 2 per 2013, according to which the European Union has a new kind of legal order, the nature of which is peculiar to the European Union, its own constitutional framework. Even the European Union does not have a constitution in a traditional sense, but the European Court of Justice discussed in this opinion about constitutional framework and founding principles, a particularly sophisticated institutional structure, and a full set of legal rules to ensure its operation. The founding treaties, meaning the Treaty of European Union and also the Treaty of Functioning of European Union, are the basic constitutional charter of the Union, having in the center the common values laid down in Article 2. Let's see these values: human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, the rule of law, respect for human rights, including the rights of persons belonging to minorities. These values are common to the member states in a society in which pluralism, non-discrimination, tolerance, justice, solidarity, and equality between men and women prevail. Also, according to the case law of European Court of Justice, at the heart of this legal structure are the fundamental rights recognized by the Charter of Human Rights, which is binding. It's a part of the treaties of European Union. And under the Article 6 of the Treaty of European Union has the same legal value as the treaties. Respect for these rights being a condition of the lawfulness of European Union acts, so that measures incompatible with those rights are not acceptable in the European Union. The significance of this Article 2, enshrining the common values in the construction of European Union, has led in various studies on this topic to the idea that the values it sets forth can be seen as limits for amending the treaties, like limits of the revisions of the national constitution. Noting at the same time the lack of an express qualification in these regards in the treaties or in the case law of the European Court of Justice. However, with time, the European Court of Justice has gradually defined the meaning of Article 2, as I mentioned before, towards the acknowledgement of what is called the identity of the European Union, leading to interesting insights for debates on European constitutionalism. I gave you here the case, the main case, when the court stated like this. That the values contained in Article 2 have been identified and are shared by the member states. They define the very identity of the European Union as a common legal order. Thus, the European Union must be able to defend these values within the limits of its powers as laid down by the treaties. These perspectives of a fundamental core of the European legal system that must be protected could lead to an explicit definition of the power of the European Court of Justice and its role in verifying the compliance of future treaty amendments with the limits enshrined in Article 2 of the Treaty of European Union. So, in this kind of complex legal order, the amendment of European Union constituent treaties is subject to a dual filtering mechanism. On the one hand, the European Court of Justice of European Union, acting in its capacity as a quasi-constitutional court, it takes its side regarding the Union's core identity and ensure compliance with the common values enshrined in Article 2 of the Treaty of European Union. On the other hand, the constitutional courts of the member states exercise their own review by ensuring that such treaty amendments respect the constitutional core and identity protected by their respective national constitutions, because some of the constitutional courts of the European Union, I gave a lot of examples in my study, and I mentioned here only the example of the Romanian constitution, provides the power of the Constitutional Court to review the treaties, international treaties, before ratification. That's why I discuss about this filtering mechanism, and there are famous case law jurisprudence, for example, of the German Federal Court concerning the review of the amendments of the Treaty of the European Union, Maastricht Treaty, Lisbon Treaty, and so on. So, crucial to articulate the cornerstone of the European Union order, this identity, common values, and those of the member state constitution, and to have the same understanding of the common component, it's very important. It is crucial to articulate these components and understanding. Beyond the doctrinal debates focused on the revision of the treaty itself and the role of the European Court of Justice, could undertake of verifying the revision acts in relation to the limits that establish the identity core of the European Union as a common legal order, I think it's important to answer to this question. Article 2 can also be seen as a limit on the revision of the amendment of the member state constitution, supplementing or integrating the limits existing in this constitution, either explicit or implicit. Let's see the situation in the member state. And first, the constitutional moment. the moment when the states become member of the European Union. Studies in the fields have advanced this concept of constitutional moment in connection with the accession to the states to the European Union. And this means that a state applying for European Union membership must align its own constitution and national identity with the values enshrined in Article 2, the so-called Copenhagen criteria, which involve strict monitoring of such alignment. Of course, this decision to align the constitutional arrangements to European Union values is a sovereign choice of the candidate state. For example, Romania prepared this accession to European Union, amending its own constitution. It's the only amendment of the constitution in the democratic history of Romania. Our constitution was adopted in 1991, and it was amended in 2003 to prepare the accession to the European Union. Additionally, any constitutional adaptation made by the states to achieve accession or normative compatibility must not have altered the essence of their own constitution. At that moment, for example, the Constitutional Court of Romania, in that decision, analyzed the compatibility of this type of legal order, European Union, with the limits of the revision of the Romanian constitution. So, limits of the amendment. It was a situation in other countries of European Union as well, and you'll find details concerning other states in my study. After joining the European Union, the member states agreed that based on the principle of loyal cooperation, they shall take any appropriate measure, general or particular, to ensure fulfillment of the obligation arising out of the treaties or resulting from the act of the institution of the Union, facilitate the achievement of the Union's tasks, and refrain from any measure which could jeopardize the attainment of the Union's objective. This is the Article 4 of the Treaty of the European Union. So, as a consequence, after passing through the constitutional filter, in that constitutional moment, filter explicit or implicit of the 27 member states, the legal order established by the European Union treaties appears to act as a filter for them as well. We become member, and after that, we have to participate and to respect and have a loyal cooperation with the other states and with the European Union. That's why I say here that this order, the order appears to act as a filter for the national legal orders. Given the generality of the expression of the Treaty of European Union, any measure, you see, it can be stated that the very amendment of the member state's constitution is subject to a supranational filter. This is a question as well. The accuracy of this limit could be achieved according to the mechanism described by Professor von Bockdendey through the formula of reverse Zolange doctrine, functioning in exactly the opposite way of the original model. You know or you remember that Zolange 1, Zolange 2, there are two famous case law of the German Federal Court before the enshrining the Charter of Fundamental Rights and establishing the limits and the power of the German Constitutional Court in order to protect the guarantees of the freedoms of the rights and freedoms enshrined in the German Constitution. So according to Professor von Bockdendey, with regard to the European Union fundamental rights, the reverse Zolange doctrine operates as follows. Beyond the scope of Article 51 of the Charter, any member state remains autonomous in its fundamental rights protection as long as, the meaning of Zolange is as long as the presumption holds that it respects the essence of fundamental rights enshrined in Article 2 of the Treaty of European Union. All courts in the European Union are competent to police this presumption. If the presumption is rebutted, the European Union mechanism for protecting the Union's common value apply. So the question is, can this reasoning be extended to the constitutional amendment process so as to suggest that the autonomy of the states in reconfiguring their own constitution is limited by the European Union identity as defined in Article 2 of the Treaty of European Union? Professor van Voogdeni also noted that values enshrined in Article 2 are vague and open, which can lead to debates regarding their interpretation by the European Court of Justice and their integration with national constitutional courts. However, the European Court of Justice continued to define these values over time as the European Union developed mechanisms to ensure the informance and effectiveness such the rule of law mechanism. The most, let's say, applicative part with a Romanian example of applying all these theories, but especially in the fields of human rights. You have here the Article 152 of Romanian Constitution enshrining express limits of the amendment of the Constitution. According to this article, the provisions of the Constitution regarding the national, independent, unitary, and indivisible character of the Romanian state, the republican form of the government, the territorial integrity, the independence of justice, political pluralism, official language shall not be subject to revision. Very important for our discussion, paragraph 2. No revision shall be made if it results in the suppression of the citizens' fundamental rights and freedoms or of the safeguard thereof. And paragraph 3, the Constitution shall not be revised, shall not be amending during a state of siege or emergency or in a wartime. In a most recent case law in 2021, the Constitutional Court of Romania established that these provisions are the identity core of Romanian Constitution. Let's see a bit the powers of the Constitutional Court. According to the Article 146 of the Constitution, the Constitutional Court shall have the power to rule ex officio on initiative to revise the Constitution. Also, in 2004, the law on the organization and functioning of the Constitutional Court was amended, and the new power of the court was added in this regard, meaning the power to rule on the law amending the Constitution, also ex officio. So we have two powers of the Constitutional Court in these procedures: to rule or to review the initiative to amend the Constitution, and to review the law amending the Constitution after the law is adopted by the Parliament. Both decisions of the Constitutional Court exercising this power are generally binding. So we don't discuss about opinion, advisory opinion. These decisions are binding. So it is not possible to amend the Constitution against the decisions of the Constitutional Court. They are also important in terms of the constitutional review of the limits of the amendment according to the Romanian Constitution. This article, Article 1 of the Constitution, principles, especially the principle of rule of law. You can see here that there are a lot of concepts, a lot of guarantees common also to the express limits of the revision, but there are also other concepts, other guarantees, and it is important. I'll explain immediately Why? Also, there are important 3 other articles. The article concerning the international law and national law, international treaties on human rights, and integration into the European Union. According to these articles, treaties ratified by Parliament are part of national law. Very important for our discussion, the rule according to which human rights treaties to which Romania is a party form part of the constitutional bloc with constitutional interpretative value, meaning that the constitutional provisions must be interpreted and applied in accordance with the provisions of international human rights treaties to which Romania is a party, and priority for application in the event of inconsistency with national laws, unless the constitution or national laws contain more favorable provisions. We have a separate article concerning the relationship between national constitutional order and European Union, Article 148, according to which the founding treaties of the European Union, including the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, as well as other binding European regulation, have a distinct legal regime. They have priority in case of conflict with provisions of domestic law, and the Constitutional Court stated that they have a supra-legislative but infra-constitutional position. What does it mean? It means supremacy of the Constitution. The complexity, yes, is concerning the human rights as well, is given by this area of guarantees of protection of human rights enshrined in different catalogs of human rights at the national level, European Union level, at international level, and courts entitled to protect these warranties: Constitutional Court, European Court of Justice, and European Court of Human Rights. In our history, we have 10 initiatives to amend the Constitution, and an analysis of the decisions of the Romanian Constitutional Court reveals a progressively more nuanced interpretation of the explicit limits on constitutional revisions, which occurred in parallel with the increasing complexity of the international legal framework of reference, particularly following Romania's accession to the European Convention, the Protection of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms in 1994, and after that, Romania's accession to the European Union in 2007. I identified some stages in interpreting the limits of the constitutional revisions. First stage, decision pronounced in 2018 and 2014. I discuss only this nuanced approach. The interpretation of the limits of the revision took into account not only the express provisions of Article 152, but also the general principles outlined in Article 1 of the Constitution, and also the international treaties of human rights to which Romania is a party, as provided by the Article 220 of the Constitution. I discussed before, block of constitutionality. The Constitutional Court established in this regard that in carrying out its power, the Constitutional Court is ruled upon the fulfillment of the constitutional requirement of form and substance regarding the revision of the Constitution with the Article 150-152, and also the Court is ruled upon to observance of the provisions of the international treaties in the field of human rights is a party to, and the principles set forth in Article 1 of the Constitution. So it appears that the identity core become a block of constitutionality incorporating the principles and also the treaties in the matter of human rights to which Romania is a party. The next stage, the most recent decision in 2019, emphasize an interesting nuance regarding the application of European Union law in controlling the initiative to amend the Constitution. And I explained that here we have a different article, Article 142. In these decisions, the Constitutional Court examined the initiative to amend the Constitution intended to forbid the President of Romania from granting pardons for crimes of corruption. And the Constitutional Court specified more clearly that the way in which it proceeds to analyze the limits of the review, showing that the court's analysis must be carried out in 2 steps when evaluating the suppression of fundamental rights and freedoms or their guarantees in the sense of Article 152, paragraph 2 of the Constitution. First step, the analysis of the amendment of the Constitution in relation to the general principle which guide the entire catalogs of fundamental rights and freedoms, and the analysis of the review initiative in relation to an applicable fundamental rights and freedom. And starting from the premise that the fundamental rights and freedoms of citizens and their guarantees cannot be considered a diffuse set of elements without any connection between them, but makes up a coherent and unitary system of value based on human dignity, the Constitutional Court explained that the value of human dignity in relation to the practice, not only to European Court of Human Rights, but also taking into account the Charter for Fundamental Rights and European Union. Enforcing the idea that the human dignity is the essence of fundamental rights and freedoms and that represents in itself a limit to the revision of the Constitution. If you remember that human dignity is not enshrined in Article 152, the limits of the revision, but is a principle enshrined in Article 1 of the Constitution. So this interpretation of the Constitutional Court of this nucleus, of these limits of the revision, related to the principle, related to the treaties of human rights, related to the European Union framework of human rights, determined that these values to appear in a remodeling influenced by the interplay also of the practice jurisprudence of the European Court of Human Rights and European Court of Justice. In the same way, the reference to human dignity, which is a general principle enshrined in Article 1 of the Romanian Constitution, as I said, the gate is open to the valorization of other principles, such as rule of law, which is a very, very large principle. Conclude discussing about challenges. The standards of protection of human rights, which is a topic not only for our region, but also for other regions and other countries of the world. Since the door to shaping or reshaping the core of the Constitution is open to the regulation of fundamental rights at the European level, a challenge concerns the variation of standards in this matter. But the Constitutional Court interpretation of the position of human rights with the limits of the amendments to the Constitution is itself variable, but it's important that in the last decision, the Constitutional Court argued that increased protection of fundamental rights and offer a kind of solution. In this decision, the Constitutional Court seemed to interpret the word suppression enshrined in Article 152 of the Constitution in a different way, expressly stating that the revision of the Constitution can only be in the sense of raising the standards of protection of fundamental rights. Upward protection of fundamental rights stated that the protection of the fundamental rights and freedoms can only have an upward orientation. So, concluding, European Union comprise the overlap of values, qualified as cornerstone identity, creates a continuous plasticity of identity that are constantly reconfigured and developing together. The key to this development is the dialogue between courts. And at the global level, the analysis could be broadened by exploring the interaction between constitutional courts and regional courts entrusted with the protection of human rights. Of course, at the European level, we have a problematic concept, constitutional identity, which is not common as a debate to other states of the world. But this relationship between the courts at the global level discuss and invites to critical reflection on whether we are witnessing a structural transformation of the concept of constitutional limits from instrument of sovereign self-limitation into mechanism of normative negotiation among competing legal order. Such a shift carries significant implication for constitutional sovereignty, democratic legitimacy, the classic theory of classic theory of constitutionalism and supremacy of the Constitution. I have here an invitation to debate with some questions. If you're interested to discuss about your experience in Indonesia as well, I will be very interested about this experience. And thank you so much for inviting me and for listening to me. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Professor Marietta Safta, for sharing with us about constitutional amendment, also the role of court in interpreting the limits of amending the constitutions, reflecting on experience in the Europe, where the constitution also multi-level constitution, and there was also the role of court there, and also overlap between authority jurisdiction between the national constitutional court with the European Court of Justice, and creating dialogue between court and them. So we still have time, and I'm open for a comment or question from participant. Please raise your hand if you have any question or comment, maybe also to share from the Indonesian experience to bring to our debate discussion today. Please. Is there any? So that Bernard Nicholas Singarimbun raise hand.
Yes.
Please.
Thank you. Thank you,
Bernard.
Pak Yance, for the floor. So first of all, thank you so much, Professor Marietta. On behalf of the ICON-S, of course, the co-chairs, I and the secretary, as well as the advisory boards, including Pak Yance, would like to extend our thank you for your time and your willingness to be one of the speakers in our 2 days event of the grand launching of ICON-S Indonesia. In terms of your presentation, it was really delightful. It was really engaging. Especially about how related to how the global issues right now. And I heard about the constitutional issues in Romania. There was like a protest like in a few weeks ago or like a few days ago about the judicial abuses in Romania, Professor, if I'm not if I'm done wrong. So I would like to ask you, in a multi-level system like Romania, like how should the national courts of Romania interpret this kind of limits of the constitutional amendments in likes of like domestic constitutional identity, and also because of Romania is a part of the EU, so how about really how it reacts to the EU law obligations? So I think that's my questions, Professor.
Thank you, Bernard.
Thank you
so I think that Professor Marietta can directly respond.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your question and also for your comments. Indeed, these days there are discussions, pending discussions about the issue of judicial independence in itself. There are a lot of debates. I participate last week in a conference on judicial independence, for example, and I discuss about the issue of remuneration of the judges, because it is a problem with a lot of amendment of the laws concerning the pensions of the magistrates. It's a pending topic in Romania. And related to this topic, other topics concerning the independence and the content of the independence are discussed. So I think that this judicial independence, it's in itself a debate we can discuss a lot around. As concerned the power to interpret these limits of the Constitution, I'd like to emphasize that we have a centralized constitutional review in Romania. So we have a constitutional court according to the Kelsenian European model. So only Romanian constitutional court is empowered, entitled to control the initiative of the revision of the Constitution and also the law adopted by the Parliament. And here it is another discussions at the international level, related to the different attitudes of the constitutional courts in interpreting these limits of the revisions, meaning a more or less active attitude of the constitutional courts. And it's very important for our general topic today, how the constitutional courts reflect in their reasonings, in their decisions, the limits of the revision amendment of the Constitution. Because they are very active, the Constitution become more rigid, because the limits are expanding somehow. So it is a matter of legitimacy of the Constitutional Court in expanding more these limits. In relation with the European legal order, at this moment, in the last decisions I mentioned in 2019, the Constitutional Court incorporates in the constitutional review of the initiative of the revision of the Constitution the Charter of, and the case law of the European Court of Justice. So the Constitutional Court tried to interpret the limits of the revision of the Constitution, of the amendment of the Constitution, related to the human rights. That's why I consider that it is very important to discuss about the human rights. So it interprets these limits in agreement both to the jurisprudence of European Court of Human Rights and the jurisprudence of European Court of Justice, and provided in that decisions that interesting theory of upward protection of human rights. That's why I opened here this question, and I would be also interested to know your opinion about the relationship between this upward protection of human rights when we discuss about human rights as a limit of the amendment of the Constitution, and the general doctrine of living tree doctrine, of protection of human rights in this upward way. So even we don't discuss of the multi-level system as European Union, I think that also other constitutional courts in the world, maybe when they interpret the human rights related to the amendment of the Constitution, they use also other international instruments. So it is important for me, or important for our discussion and my research, to know how they introduce and modulate the limits of the amendment of their own constitutions in relation with this international framework. I don't know, for example, in Indonesia, if you have such power of the constitutional court and the practice of the constitutional court in this regard.
Okay, thank you, Professor Marietta. So we still have around 5 minutes. If anyone would like to ask another question, it's also still have time. So in Indonesia, we don't have a special authority of the Constitutional Court to review the amending process of the Constitution. And yeah, but that's why we can learn a lot from European experience. Yeah. So I'm also curious. We know that when I attend icons in Brazil a few months ago, there is a presentation by Tom Ginsburg showing that if we reflect to the constitutional amendment in the last 20 years, so it seems that all of the amendment is going to be creating so-called like in line with the democratic backsliding. So they try to weakening the fundamental principle of human rights, also check and balances as well. And the court can play a role basically, to prevent such democratic backsliding. What we see in the Hungary and also in Poland. So it seems that the court cannot work well to prevent that trends. I don't know whether then the role of the European court level can also prevent democratic backsliding that happen at the national level, that they usually do constitutional amendment as well. What is your observation on that, Prof. Marietta?
Excellent comment. Thank you so much, Professor Arizona. Indeed, that's why I think it's important the power of this connection between national and international level, and related also, as Bernard noticed, to the issue of independence of the justice and the constitutional courts, because otherwise all these discussions will turn to the backsliding, as you mentioned before.
Okay, thank you. So we're now approaching the end of this session. So I would like to express my gratitude to Professor Marietta Safta for your contribution to this event, to the grand launching of ICONAS Indonesia, and we hope that we can continue our dialogue in the future, whether through this online platform or maybe attending the upcoming Dublin ICONAS conference, or maybe other forums that we can meet together. So before ending this session, so I would like to inform that there will be a certificate of appreciation by the organizing committee to Prof. Marietta Safta.
Thank you so
thank you
much.
so
Thank
much.
you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for your contribution. We're really happy to talk and also to learn from your experience. Okay.
Thank you so much.
No,
Congratulations and a lot of success for the future. See you in Dublin. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, so now I give it back to the MC, Fernanda, to continue the session.
All right, thank you
Please,
very much.
Fernanda.
Thank you very much, Prof. Marietta Safta, and also Dr. Jans Arizona for the third session that we have just completed. And as our also extension of gratitude, we will also like to present our certificate of appreciation for Dr. Yance Arizona for your moderation work in our session today.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank you
so
very
much,
much.
Fernanda.
All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to firstly remind the audience to fill out the attendance form that has been sent to you in the chat box previously. And we also look forward to your membership in Icon as Indonesian Chapter and on future Icon as events. We also extend our invitation to follow our social media at icons_Indonesia in Instagram for further information on any subsequent Icon as event. The conclusion of the third lecture session today also marks the end of the grand launching of Icon as Indonesia Chapter Day 1. We highly appreciate all of your participation and support into making this grand launching event a success. We sincerely hope to see your continued support and participation on the second day of the grand launching of Icon as Indonesian Chapter, which will start at 8 a.m. tomorrow, and on any subsequent Icon as Indonesia event. Thank you, and we hope to see you very soon.
So thank you so much, everyone, the audiences, of course, the advisory boards. We have here Professor Susi Dwi Haryanti, Dr. Muhammad Nofrisal Bahar, Dr. Yanti Arizona, Professor Diana Puspitawati, and of course, my beloved co-chairs, Dr. Rosa and Mr. Damian Agata, for all the hard work for the first day, and looking forward to meet all of you in the second day tomorrow morning, Western Indonesian time. So thank you and see you tomorrow. So this is the rundown for tomorrow. So please feel free to participate starting from the 8 a.m. tomorrow. All right. So see you everyone and have a nice and enjoyable day at the rest of the day. Thank you.